The candle on the floor had gone out. Once again, the boy had failed at the simplest of tasks, and everyone around him was laughing at his back. He walked silently toward the exit and, in passing, brushed the extinguished wick with his little finger. He doesn't look. He doesn't stop. Behind him, a white flame flares up without soot or smoke. Such a fire is described only in books from 3 centuries ago, and only one girl with silver hair turns around and sees it. Now let's go back a minute. Caden Ash opens his eyes on the cold stone floor of the training hall. 4 figures in uniform robes stand over him, laughing openly. Someone pokes a finger at the extinguished candle. He didn't light it again. He fell again. Another joke for the whole group. But Caden doesn't hear their laughter. He hears voices. Thousands of voices. 300 years of someone else's memories crash down on him all at once, like water from a burst dam. He remembers the smell of burning fields.
He remembers the face of a faceless creature. He remembers how his own hands, broad and scarred by the hammer, pressed against the red-hot seal, and the world flashed white. And then silence. The endless silence of the Hall of Echoes. And now this floor, this ceiling, this gaunt body that smells of sweat and fear. Memory tightens into a knot at the back of his head and falls silent. Only understanding remains. He knows who he is. He knows who he was. And he knows this body isn't his. A boy named Caden Ash failed 3 exams in a row. He owed a senior 50 silver coins. He fell asleep in lectures from hunger. They called him the empty space on the 3rd floor. And now, in that empty space, the one who once killed a god has awakened. Caden sits down. His head is spinning. He clenches his fists. Weak. Never mind. He'll get used to it. The laughter around him dies down. Someone holds out a hand to him. A girl. Silver hair down to her shoulder blades. Quiet gray eyes. And then the world stops. That line of her cheekbones. That habit of tucking her chin. That way of clenching her fingers before she speaks. He knows those gestures. He's known them for 300 years. Selena. No. Selena Morrigan grew old and died 12 after him. She never married. She waited for the one who could not return. This is not her. This is her blood, 15 generations later. Caden takes the outstretched hand. He stands up. He tries to smile. The smile comes out too weary for a 17-year-old. And now he walks toward the exit. He lights the wick. A white fire flares behind him, and only the silver-haired girl turns around and remains silent. Caden steps out into the corridor of the Silver Spire. He remembers this place. 300 years ago, there were no marble columns or stained glass windows with coats of arms here. There used to be a military camp here. Tents, mud, the wounded, the smell of blood and burnt manna. Now the children of aristocrats drink mint tea between lectures. 320 years of the long peace, a beautiful name for an era bought with a single life. And this man is now standing in a foreign body, trying to remember where the dining hall is. His stomach growls. The boy hasn't eaten since yesterday. Caden finds the dining hall by the smell. Porridge made with water, stale bread, for scholarship students. The aristocrats eat in another wing, where it smells of meat. He sits in a corner and eats in silence. In his past life, he went without food for 9 days during the siege of Craigholm. Back then, porridge like this seemed like the best food in the world. The body thinks otherwise. The body wants meat and sweets. The body is used to wanting and not getting. Caden finishes every last spoonful. He wipes the bowl with bread and thinks about money, a debt of 50 silver coins. His uniform will soon tear at the elbow. The boy doesn't have a single coin.
And the hero from his past life never had any either. Only his hands. But his hands were always the most important thing he had. He returns to the room on the 3rd floor. Small. Cold. A cracked training staff lies on the table. The worst of the set. Scholars always get the worst one. Caden twirls it in his hands. The crack runs from the pommel to the middle. Any modern master would say the staff is dead. Caden runs his finger along the crack and closes his eyes. Ash, cut down at the start of winter. A core of wyvern sinew. Cheap, but alive. He feels a pulse beneath his fingers. The staff isn't dead. The staff is forgotten. The difference is vast. Caden puts it back. Now is not the time. First, he must understand the rules of this world. He lies down and closes his eyes. And he goes inside, to where 1,000 years of memory are coiled. The Eclipse War, the Dark Lord, the Seal, his death. 300 years of watching from beyond the edge. The great houses that hid behind his back and then erased his name from the monuments. Velcrest, Ashton, Morrigan, Sunva. They rewrote history, made themselves heroes, and crossed him out. A commoner could not save the world. It shattered their belief that power flows through the blood. The anger burned out 2 centuries ago. What remained was clarity and weariness. And something else. The seal is weakening. His seal, imposed by his hands, his blood, his life. It's cracking, slowly but surely. And along with it, something inside him is cracking. A part of his soul remained there. He is incomplete, like a blade without a hilt, like a rune without its final stroke. And for now, that suits him. Morning rings the bell. 6 o'clock, the first day of the new cycle. Caden washes his face with ice-cold water. He pulls on his gray uniform, worn at the elbows. Scholars' uniforms are gray. Aristocrats are white with a silver trim. The difference is visible from 100 paces away.
Today is the entrance exam. Every freshman is given a staff and asked to show what they can do, a formality for the aristocrats, a death sentence for commoners. Students crowd the hallway. Caden spots a silver-haired girl by the wall, Lorana Morrigan, heiress of a fading northern house, the last in the line. 3 people away from her, a red-haired, freckled girl trembles, a scholarship student. She holds her staff with both hands and looks at him as if it might bite her. Caden looks at her and sees himself. Not the present one, the other one. The blacksmith's son from a border village who, 300 years ago, stood exactly like that and was just as afraid. Only no one helped that boy. The hall opens. Master Hall sits on the dais, the professor of the history of magic, a historian at a combat trial, someone's conscious choice. The trial proceeds alphabetically. The aristocrats mold fireballs and ice shields, beautiful, confidently.
And all with mistakes that Caden sees as cracks in the glass. This rune is mirrored. That gesture lost 2 beats. This spell consumes 3 times as much mana because of a 200-year-old typo in the textbook. No one knows about this. For 300 years, they've been copying from copies, and the errors have become the norm. Caden's turn comes quickly. Ash, the second letter. He steps into the center, takes the cracked wand. The hall falls silent, not from anticipation, from foreboding. Everyone knows what's coming next. Caden asks Master Hall for a knife, The hall holds its breath. She raises an eyebrow but hands him a utility knife. Caden silently carves a rune into the handle. A tiny one, the size of a pinky fingernail. 10 seconds of work. The silence in the hall shifts. He returns the knife and turns to the red-haired girl. He hands her the wand and says that it's not working for him today. He asks her to try it. The girl looks on in horror, at the wand, at the hall full of people waiting for her to fail. She takes it, raises it, and light bursts from the wand with a soft chime. Pure, white, even, like moonlight. It fills the hall from floor to ceiling. It doesn't burn. It doesn't blind. It warms. The girl can't believe it. The hall is silent. Master Hall slowly stands up. She isn't looking at the light or at the girl. She is looking at the rune. This rune doesn't exist in any modern textbook. It was inscribed 300 years ago, and only one person in history knew how to inscribe it so that it would work in the hands of others. Master Hall shifts her gaze to Caden. He yawns. He says he seems to be getting hungry and asks if he can leave. Master Hall sits down. She nods, and he writes something in the journal with a hand that trembles almost imperceptibly. Caden walked down the hallway, counting the steps to the dining hall. 47. He'd memorized it that morning. Caden Ash's body was used to counting coins, counting the days until his stipend, counting the slices of bread for the week. It was a survival habit ingrained in his muscle memory. The hero from his past life knew a different kind of count. Steps to the enemy, seconds to the blow. Liters of blood a person can lose before they can no longer hold a sword. Caden pushed that second count deeper into his mind. Not now. The scholarship students' dining hall was half empty. Lunch. The same porridge, the same bread. Caden sat down at his corner table and ate in silence. A red-haired girl sat down next to him. Isla Bragg. He knew this from the memories of the former Caden, the daughter of a village herbalist, a scholarship student just like him. She set her bowl down across from him and was silent for a few seconds. Then she said she wanted to thank him for that, for what had happened in the hall. Caden shrugged. He replied that he hadn't done anything special. He'd just noticed that the core of her staff was misaligned and had fixed it. Isla stared at him, not looking away. She didn't believe him, but she didn't argue. She only asked how he knew such things. Caden replied that he'd read a lot. It was true. He really had read a lot. 300 years in the Hall of Echoes, watching other people's memories, was, in a sense, reading. Isla nodded. She finished her porridge. She stood up. Before leaving, she turned around and said that if he ever needed help, she'd be there for him. Caden watched her back and thought that in this world, there are things that haven't changed in 3 centuries. Ordinary people help each other because there's no one else. After lunch, Caden returned to his room. He sat down at the table. He picked up the cracked staff. That rune was no longer on it. He'd carved it temporarily. A one-time use. It was safer that way. No traces remain. Now he needed to earn some money. 50 silver coins owed to senior student Ashton. That's a lot for a boy who receives a scholarship of 3 silver coins a month. But for a craftsman who knows how to repair things, it's a couple weeks' work, if you know who to turn to. Caden stepped out into the dormitory hallway and began to listen. Not with his ears, with his channels. Caden Ash's body possessed weak channels, dirty by the standards of the modern system, But Caden knew something no other mage in this academy knew. Channels aren't dirty, they're misused. The entire system of the purified lines was built on a lie. A beautiful, convenient, 3-century-old lie. He walked down the hall, stopped at the 4th door. Behind it, someone was swearing quietly. Caden knocked. A girl opened the door. Short, redhead, freckles. Lots and lots of freckles. And very angry eyes. She was holding a broken amulet on a chain. The stone had split in half. Caden looked at the amulet and immediately understood 3 things. First, the amulet was a family heirloom, not a cheap one. The stone was genuine resonant quartz, not a glass fake like the ones sold at the market. Second, the girl was Ashton. He noticed the crest on the buckle of her belt. Third, she had been crying a minute ago and was trying to hide it. Caden said he'd heard she had a problem and asked if he could take a look. The girl frowned. She asked who he was. Caden replied, "Ash, 3rd floor, scholar." The girl snorted. She said a scholar probably didn't know anything about family heirloom amulets. Caden nodded. He agreed. But he offered to just take a look, for free. If it didn't help, she had nothing to lose. The girl hesitated. Then she held out the amulet. Caden took it in his hands and closed his eyes. Resonant quartz. A crack ran across the left facet. Not from an impact, from internal stress. The stone had been overheated. One of its previous owners had pumped it full of mana beyond its limit, and the crystal lattice couldn't hold.
It had happened a long time ago, 30 years ago. The crack had grown slowly and finally burst open. Caden opened his eyes. He asked if she had a needle. The girl took a sewing needle from the desk drawer. Caden took the needle. He ran the tip along the crack. He wasn't drawing a rune. He wasn't etching a symbol. He simply drew a line. Slowly, precisely, like a blacksmith guiding a hammer along a red-hot seam. 30 seconds, a minute. The crack closed. It didn't heal, it didn't disappear, it closed. The quartz became whole again. But now there was a thin golden thread inside it, the seam, like a scar, a beautiful scar. The girl took the amulet back and stared at it, then at Caden. Her angry eyes went wide. She asked how he'd done it. Caden said he'd simply released the tension from the crystal, nothing complicated. The girl shook her head. She said her brother had taken this amulet to 3 masters, and they all said the stone was dead. Caden shrugged. The masters were wrong.
The stone wasn't dying. The stone was tired. There's a difference. The girl was silent for about 5 seconds. Then she said her name was Mirabelle Ashton. Mira. And that she owed him for this. Caden said a silver coin would be enough. Mira's eyes widened. She said that was an insultingly small amount for repairing a family heirloom. Caden replied that he needed the silver coin for dinner. No more. Mira took out the coin. She held it out, and added that she would tell her friends about him. Caden said it would be better if she didn't. Mira smiled, widely. With her freckles, that smile looked like the sun behind a cloud. She said she'd already made up her mind. Caden sighed. He went out. He bought a piece of meat and half an onion with the silver coin at the shop behind the dorm. He ate it in his room. Caden Ash's body accepted the meat as a gift from above. His stomach stopped growling. His muscles relaxed slightly. Caden lay down on the bed and thought. Mirabelle Ashton, the younger sister of that very upperclassman to whom Caden was indebted. Irony. He had repaired her family's amulet for a coin. Her brother would have charged him 50. The world hadn't changed in 300 years. The strong take, the weak give.
The only difference was that now he knew how every cog in this machine worked, and he knew where it would break. The next morning, Caden attended his first lecture, Mana Theory, a large hall for 100 students, aristocrats in the front, scholarship students in the back. The instructor started with the basics, explained what channels were, what purity was, what a ceiling was. Caden listened and said nothing. Everything the instructor said was true, partially true, truncated, tailored to fit the system. Channels determine the ceiling. That is true. The purity of channels is inherited. That is true. A commoner cannot reach the level of an heir to a great house. That is a lie.
But a lie repeated so many times that it has become a textbook. Caden sat in the back row and looked out the window. Outside the window was the academy's courtyard. There stood a monument, 4 figures, the founders of the Long Peace: Velcrest, Ashton, Moringan, Sanva, the 4 great houses that, according to the official version, defeated the Dark Lord. Caden looked at the monument. The 5th figure was missing. It had been erased. He had been erased. He turned away from the window. In the row to his right sat a girl with fiery red hair, writing so fast that her pen scratched the paper. Evelyn Valcrest, a senior, the best student in a decade. Caden watched her out of the corner of his eye. Perfect posture, perfect handwriting, perfect notes, and hands that trembled slightly. Not from the cold, from exhaustion. She'd slept 4 hours, maybe 3. The dark circles under her eyes were covered with something flesh-colored. Makeup. Or magic. Caden recognized that look. He'd seen it thousands of times in his long life. A person who works themselves to the bone and hides it behind perfection. Because if they stop for even a second, everything will collapse. He turned away. It wasn't his business. Not yet, anyway. The lecture ended. The students headed for the exit. Caden was the last to leave. Mira was waiting for him in the hallway. She stood leaning against the wall, looking like someone who had been waiting for a long time, but was pretending not to. Standing next to her was a tall girl with black hair tied back in a ponytail. Her face was expressionless. Her eyes were alert. Under her uniform, something resembling a scabbard was visible. Sonhwa Yoon. Caden recognized her by her posture before he recognized her face. The posture of a mercenary, weight on the balls of her feet. Her shoulders were relaxed but ready for action. Her hands were free. Mira introduced them to each other. She said that Yoon was her classmate, that Yoon had been transferred from the Eastern clan under some agreement, and that she needed to repair an item. Mira looked at Caden with an expression of complete confidence, as if he had already agreed. Caden looked at Yoon. Yoon looked at him. Silently, she pulled a stiletto from under her uniform. She placed it in her palm and held it out. The blade was intact, but the balance was off. Caden took the stiletto and understood immediately. The handle was standard, military issue, designed for a man's hand. Yoon was a 17-year-old girl with narrow palms and long fingers. Her whole life she had held a weapon that weren't made for her, and she compensated for it with muscle tension. That's why her wrists ached. That's why she wore bracelets on both arms. Not for beauty, to hide the bandages. Caden looked at her. He said the stiletto wasn't broken. He said the stiletto just wasn't hers. And he added that he could make a better one. Yoon blinked. It was the first expression on her face during the entire conversation. Caden spent the evening in the workshop in the basement of the dormitory. The workshop was small. 1 workbench, 1 set of tools, 3 vice grips, only one of which worked. A place for scholarship students who had nowhere else to go. No one had been in here for weeks. A thick layer of dust lay on the workbench. Caden wiped it off with his sleeve and laid out his tools. Yoon's stiletto lay before him.
He wasn't going to repair it, he was going to remake it. In his past life, Arius Vorgan had been a blacksmith's son, before he became a hero, before he learned to kill, before he had to forget that his hands were capable of more than just destruction. For the first 15 years of his first life, he stood at the forge and held a hammer. His father taught him that every blade is born for a specific hand, not for a hand in general, for this hand, with these fingers, with this grip, with this strength and this weakness. Caden took a measuring tape and wrapped it around the hilt. He memorized it. Then he recalled Yoon's hand, the width of her palm, the length of her fingers, the distance between her index finger and thumb when she gripped it, the angle of the wrist. He managed to take all of this in during those 3 seconds when she handed him the stiletto. The work took 4 hours. Caden removed the old wrapping from the hilt. He filed down the protrusion on the guard that was pressing against the base of her thumb. He rewrapped the handle with a thin cord from the workshop's supplies. Each turn was calculated, not for beauty, for grip, for this specific grip. Then he worked on the balance. He shifted the center of gravity a finger and a half toward the blade. Yoon was fast. He could tell by her posture. A fast fighter works with the tip of the blade, so the weight needed to be there. When Caden was finished, the stiletto lay on the workbench and looked almost exactly as it had before. The difference was imperceptible, but whoever took it in hand, Yoon, would feel the difference instantly. Caden wiped his hands. He glanced at the clock. 2 in the morning. His body wanted sleep. His body ached from 4 hours of work because Caden Ash's muscles weren't used to manual labor. He lay down on the workbench and fell asleep right there. In the morning, the sound of footsteps woke him. Someone was coming down the stairs to the basement. Caden opened his eyes and sat up. Standing in the doorway was Lorana Morrigan. Silver hair, quiet eyes. She looked at him with an expression he didn't immediately understand. Then he understood. Curiosity. A cautious, gentle curiosity. She said that Mira had told her about the craftsman who repairs things for a silver coin. She said she hadn't come to have something repaired, she'd come to look. Caden stood up from the workbench. He brushed off his uniform. He asked what exactly she wanted to see. Lorana paused. Then she pulled a long bundle from behind her back. She unwrapped it. A blade. An old one. Slender. Silvery metal with a blue sheen. The Morrigan family blade. Caden looked at it, and the world froze again. He knew this blade. Not this specific one, but this metal, this sheen, this pattern on the hilt. 300 years ago, he had held a blade made of the same metal in his hands. Selena Celine had held it. That blade sang, with a quiet, clear ringing that made everything around it stand still. The Morrigan family blades sang in the voices of their owners, passed down from mother to daughter. Each new owner tuned it to herself, and the blade remembered. This blade was silent. Lorana said it had fallen silent 100 years ago, that 3 generations of women in her line had tried to awaken it and failed. Everyone thinks it's just old, that the metal is worn out, that its time had run out. She said this in an even voice, without pain, as if repeating someone else's words, which she had heard so many times that she had stopped feeling them. Caden reached out his hand. Lorana placed the blade in his palm. Heavy, cold, and silent, like an empty house. Caden closed his eyes and listened, not with his ears, with his fingers. The metal spoke to him in a language no living master knew. The language of vibration, the language of structure, the language of molecules that remember every hand that has touched them,
The blade was not dead. The blade was not old. The blade was tuned to a voice that no longer existed. The last woman who sang in resonance with it had died 100 years ago, and the blade was waiting for her voice. It couldn't accept another. Not because it didn't want to, because it hadn't been retuned. No one had told it that it could listen to another. Caden opened his eyes. He looked at Lorana. She stood there waiting, quietly, patiently, like someone accustomed to waiting for bad news. Caden said he could fix it. Lorana didn't answer. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she asked what fix meant. Caden explained. The blade is tuned to her great-grandmother's voice. It needs to be retuned to her voice. Not to erase the old one, to add a new one. Lorana was silent for a long time. Then she asked if she could stay and watch. Caden nodded. The work was delicate, not physical. Caden held the blade in his hands and slowly ran his fingers along the edge. He was feeling for the resonance nodes, the old ones, the frozen ones. He didn't break them, he loosened them, one by one, like a man untangling knots in an old rope without cutting it. Lorana sat on an upside-down box in the corner and watched. She didn't say a word, she just watched. Caden felt her gaze like warmth, a strange sensation. Caden Ash's body wasn't used to being looked at without mockery. An hour, 2, 3. Caden worked in silence. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The channels in his body hummed with tension. He used the bare minimum of force, the absolute minimum, the silent resonance technique through intention, not through the channels. But even this minimum was hard for his body to bear. Dirty channels, a weak body. If he pushed any harder, the channels would crack. And then there would be no second chance. At the 4th hour, Caden stopped. He laid the blade on the workbench, wiped his forehead. His hands were shaking. Lorana stood up and walked over. She looked at the blade, then at him. She asked why he was shaking. Caden said he was tired. It was true, but not the whole truth. Lorana handed him a handkerchief, white, embroidered with the Morrigan crest. Caden took it, wiped his hands, wanted to give it back. Lorana shook her head, said to keep it. Caden looked at her silver hair, at her quiet eyes, at the way she tilted her chin slightly downward when she looked up. And in that moment, something inside him snapped, quietly and painfully. Not the channels, something else, something old. He tucked the handkerchief into his pocket. He said the blade wasn't ready yet. It needed a few more sessions. Lorana nodded. She asked when to come. Caden said tomorrow, in the evening. She smiled, just a little, with the corner of her lips, and left. Caden stood in the empty workshop and looked at the blade on the workbench. The blade was silent, but it was silent in a different way. Not like an empty house, like a house where someone had woken up, but hadn't gotten out of bed yet. Caden sat down on a box where Lorana had sat. He closed his eyes. Selena laughed the same way, into her fist, hiding her smile, as if joy were something forbidden. 300 years, 15 generations, and that gesture hadn't disappeared. Blood remembers what the mind forgets. Caden opened his eyes. He stood up. He went to the dining room. His body wanted to eat. Mira sat down next to him at lunch. She chattered non-stop. She told him that Yoon had asked when the stiletto would be ready, that Evelyn was interested in what had happened during the entrance exam, that Master Hall had asked about him in the department. Caden ate his porridge and listened. Mira spoke like a bird, quickly, jumping from thought to thought. She was 16, and she saw him as an interesting project. Caden didn't mind. Let her see. It's worse when they don't see at all. Mira asked what he had been doing all night. Caden replied that he had been working. Mira asked on what. Caden said on one thing for one person. Mira narrowed her eyes. She asked if it was for Lirana. Caden remained silent. Mira laughed and said that meant yes. On the third day, Yoon came to see Caden. She stood at the workshop door and waited. She didn't knock. She just stood there. Caden sensed her presence before he saw her. A mercenary. She knew how to stand so quietly that the air forgot she was there. Caden opened the door and held out the stiletto. Yoon took it, snatched it. She turned it in her hand. Her face didn't change, but her fingers did. They settled on the hilt like water settling into a channel. Precisely, without a gap, without tension. She gripped it again, then again. Every grip was right. Every one was hers. Yoon looked at Caden. She was silent for a few seconds. Then she asked how much she owed him. Caden said 1 silver coin. Yoon didn't snort. She didn't argue. She took out the coin and held it out. Then she paused for another second and asked how he knew the size of her palm. Caden replied that he had a good eye for such things. Yoon looked at him with that long, unblinking stare that makes ordinary people nervous. Caden wasn't nervous. He'd endured much harsher stares. Yoon nodded. She turned around. She left. She stopped at the door. Without turning around, she said that the stiletto felt better in her hand than any weapon she'd ever had. Caden nodded, though she didn't see it. Yoon left. An hour later, Lirana came down to the workshop, the evening session, the second one. Caden took the blade from under the workbench where he kept it wrapped in a rag. He laid it on the surface. Lirana sat on her box, just like yesterday, silently. Caden worked. His fingers glided along the blade. The resonance nodes yielded slowly, one by one. Old voices, dozens of voices. Grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother. Each had left her mark. Each tuned the blade to herself, layer by layer. 100 years ago, the last retuning had failed. One of the women of the Meringan clan had tried to drown out her mother's voice with her own, and failed. The blade had jammed between two frequencies. Neither one nor the other sounded. Silence. Caden loosened the nodes but did not remove them. Every voice was part of the blade's history. To erase them would be to erase the clan's memory. He didn't want that. He wanted to make room for a new voice. For Lirana's voice. At the second hour, Lirana spoke. Quietly, as if to herself. She said her grandfather was ill, that the Morrigan line was dying out, that she was the last, that everyone expected something from her that she didn't understand, that the blade was silent, and it felt like a death sentence, as if she were unworthy. Caden listened, never taking his eyes off the blade. She spoke, and he worked. It was a conversation without glances, the most honest kind of conversation, when you don't have to control your face, when you can just speak. Lirana fell silent. Then she asked why he was doing this, why he was fixing other people's things for a silver coin, why he helps people he doesn't know. Caden was silent for a few seconds. Then he said that every object has its intended owner, that universal magic is laziness, that the hairpin works because it's a hairpin for a specific person. that the gloves help because they're sewn for specific hands, that the blade sings because it knows whose voice to listen to. Lorana fell silent. Then she said that no one thinks that way. Caden replied that he knows. The third hour, the fourth. Caden set the blade down. His hands were trembling again, more than yesterday. The channels burned with a dull, aching pain from the back of his neck to his fingertips. His body was warning him. A little more, and it would be bad. Caden stopped. He said that was enough for today. Lorana nodded. She stood up. She walked over to the workbench. She looked at the blade and froze. The blade vibrated ever so slightly, barely noticeable, like a string after a finger has run along it. Not a sound, the promise of sound. Lorana looked at Caden. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen in 3 centuries. Hope. He turned away.
The next few days passed in a rhythm he was beginning to like. Lectures in the morning. He sat in the back row and said nothing. He listened to the professors and found errors in every third formula. He didn't correct them. It wasn't his time. In the afternoon, the workshop. People started coming to him, first 1 at a time, then 2 at a time. A broken amulet, a cracked focusing crystal, a wand that gave electric shocks, a bracelet with a lingering curse. Caden fixed everything. He took a silver coin, sometimes a copper one, sometimes a piece of bread. Word spread slowly. Mira helped. She knew everyone at the academy and loved to talk. By the end of the first week, Caden had earned 8 silver coins. His debt to Ashton began to seem less endless. In the evenings, Lorana would come to the workshop. She would sit on a crate. She would watch him work on the blade. Sometimes she would speak. Sometimes she would be silent. It became a ritual, a quiet evening ritual for 2. Caden caught himself looking forward to these evenings, and that frightened him. Not because he was afraid of attachment, because attachment to her felt like betrayal. On the 6th day, what he had been waiting for happened. During the morning lecture on practical magic, the students were given an assignment. Basic enhancement. Everyone had to enhance their training wand with a standard rune and demonstrate the result. The aristocrats finished quickly. Their wands were smooth, beautiful, and worked at 60% of their maximum. Standard, textbook, normal. The scholarship students struggled. Ayla Bragg raised her hand and asked if she could use a different method of application. The instructor frowned and said there was only one method, by the textbook. Ayla lowered her hand. Caden was sitting next to her. He saw her disappointment. He saw her looking at her wand, unable to understand why the rune wouldn't form. He knew why. The method in the textbook was designed for those whose channels conducted mana freely, the pure channels of the aristocracy. A commoner with ordinary channels could repeat this method 1,000 times and still only achieve 20% of the maximum each time. Not because he was worse, because the method wasn't for him. Like Yuna's stiletto. Standard, designed for someone else's hand. Caden leaned toward Ayla. He whispered 3 words. Not a spell, just an instruction. Change the angle of the rune's application by 4 degrees to the left. Compensate for the channel's resistance, not with force, but with direction. Like water flowing around a rock. Ayla looked at him, then at the wand. She tried. The rune took shape. Not perfectly, but it took shape. The wand glowed. 40%, twice as much as she'd managed before. The instructor looked at her in surprise. He praised her. He asked how she'd done it. Ayla said she'd just tried a different approach. She didn't mention Caden. He hadn't asked. She'd figured it out on her own. During a break between lectures, Caden bumped into Evelyn Valcrest in the hallway. Literally bumped into her. She was walking quickly with a stack of scrolls in her hands and wasn't looking around. The scrolls fell. Caden bent down and started picking them up. Evelyn stood over him and waited silently. He looked up. Her hands were shaking, more than they had in class. A slight, constant tremor that she hid by pressing her palms against her thighs. Caden handed her the scrolls. Their fingers touched. Her skin was cold and dry. Lack of sleep, overexertion, chronic spasm of the small muscles in her hand. He could see it as clearly as an open book. Evelyn took the scrolls. She thanked him coldly and left. Caden stood in the hallway and thought. Gloves, thin ones, with a built-in stabilization rune. Could be made in an evening if he found the right fabric. Caden made the gloves at night. He found the fabric in the storage room next to the workshop. Old, thin suede. Someone had left scraps from some project. The suede was soft and pliable. Perfect. Caden cut 2 pieces to fit Evelyn's palm. He'd memorized the measurements when their fingers touched while gathering the scrolls. The width of her palm, the length of her fingers, the distance between her knuckles. 3 seconds of contact. Enough. In his past life, he'd determined the measurements of a stranger's body during a handshake. This isn't magic. It's a skill honed over centuries. He sewed the stabilization rune into the lining. He didn't draw it, he sewed it, with thread. Every stitch was part of the rune. From the outside, the gloves looked ordinary. Plain suede, a simple cut, nothing superfluous. Only the one who puts them on will feel the tremor in their fingers subside, how the muscles relax, how the hand becomes obedient and precise again. The rune worked gently. It didn't suppress the tremor. It compensated for it, like a warm hand holding yours when you're shivering from the cold. Caden finished by 4 in the morning. He placed the gloves on the table. He looked at them. Simple, thin, flesh-colored. You could wear them under a uniform, and no one would notice. He knew Evelyn wouldn't accept a gift from an unfamiliar scholarship student. She wouldn't accept it out of pride, out of habit to never show weakness, so he wouldn't give them to her. In the morning before class, Caden was the first to arrive in the lecture hall. He found Evelyn's desk, always the same one, 3rd row on the left. He placed the gloves on the edge. No note, no signature. He left, sat in the back row as usual. He waited. Evelyn arrived exactly 3 minutes before the start. As always, dark circles under her eyes, back straight, a stack of scrolls. She sat down. She saw the gloves. She paused. She picked them up. She turned them over in her hands. She frowned. She looked around. No one was looking at her. Caden wasn't looking at her. He was looking out the window. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her put on the right glove, then the left. Then her shoulders dropped slightly. Just a tiny bit. The tension drained from them like water from an overturned glass. She looked at her gloved hands. The trembling stopped. Caden turned away from the window. He took out his notes. He began to write. Half an hour into the lecture, he felt a gaze upon him. Heavy, attentive, analytical. Evelyn Valcrest was watching him from the 3rd row, not taking her eyes off him. She understood everything. Not what he had done, but that the gloves weren't ordinary, and that someone knew about her problem, about the problem she had been hiding from everyone. Caden didn't turn his head. He didn't return her gaze. The lecture ended. Evelyn left. She was wearing the gloves. She hadn't taken them off. During the break, Caden went down to the workshop. Lorana was already waiting. He knew she would come before the appointed time. She came early every day. She sat on her box and waited for him, silently, patiently.
Today was the 5th session. Caden picked up the blade. His fingers already knew every curve of that blade, every vibration, every old voice inside the metal. He loosened the last knot, carefully, like a surgeon removing the final stitch. The blade trembled, quietly, barely audible, like a sigh. Caden stopped. He laid the blade on the workbench. He looked at Lorana. He said the blade was ready to listen, that now it needed her. Lorana stood up. She approached. Her hands trembled slightly. Caden noticed. He told her not to be afraid. The blade would not test her. It would listen to her. Lorana took the blade. She raised it before her. She closed her eyes. Silence. A second. 2. 5. 10. Nothing. Lorana opened her eyes. They were filled with tears. She said she felt nothing, that she was as empty as everyone said, that she was the last one and she couldn't even do this. Caden looked at her and saw Selena. No, not Selena. Lorana, a 17-year-old girl who had carried the burden of a dead lineage her whole life and thought the problem was her. He reached out and touched the blade of the sword next to her fingers. He didn't touch her, the sword. And he said one thing, quietly. He said that the blade was now attuned to her, not to her great-grandmother's voice, not to her mother's voice, to her voice. But for it to sing, she must not repeat someone else's song. She must sing her own. Lorana looked at him. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. She asked, "What song?" Caden took his hand off the blade. He said he didn't know, that only she could know, that the blade wasn't waiting for a melody, but for the truth. Her truth. Lorana stood with the blade in her hands. She closed her eyes. She was silent. Then she opened her mouth. She didn't sing. She exhaled, a long, quiet exhale. And in that exhale was everything. Loneliness, fear, weariness from being the last one, weariness from expectations you can't live up to, tiredness from trying to be someone else. The blade rang out, not loudly, quietly, like a bell in the snow. A single note, pure, high. Her note. Lorana threw her eyes open. The blade vibrated in her hands and sang. A single note, but that note was hers. Not her mother's, not her great-grandmother's. Hers. Caden stood nearby and watched, and he was smiling. The smile of a 1,000-year-old man in the body of a 17-year-old boy. It held both joy and bitterness. Joy because he had once again done what he did best, found a broken thing and fixed it. Bitterness because this girl with silver hair was laughing into her fist, just like the one he had loved 300 years ago. And he didn't know what to do about it. Lorana lowered her blade. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said one word. "Thank you." Caden nodded. He walked over to the workbench. He began putting away his tools. His hands trembled with fatigue. His meridians ached. His body begged for rest. Lorana sheathed her blade and left. She stopped at the door. She didn't turn around. She said she'd come back tomorrow. Caden didn't answer. She left. He sat down on a box, closed his eyes, counted his heartbeats. 72 per minute, faster than it should be at rest. Caden Ash's body was reacting to her, not his mind, his body. That was a different problem, a new one he hadn't expected. That night, Caden didn't sleep. He lay on the bed in the dark room and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the seal in the south. It was weakening. He felt it like a distant toothache. Constant. Background. A part of his soul was there, in the seal. Without it, he was incomplete. Couldn't use his full power. Couldn't become who he was. Arius Vorgan. A hero. But he couldn't take it back either. If he took a part of his soul from the seal would fall. And whatever came after it would follow it here. The Dark Lord. Or what remained of him. A double-edged choice. To be himself and destroy the world, or to be Caden and save it. Again. At dawn he got up, washed his face, put on his uniform, went to class. In the hallway, Evelyn Valcrest intercepted him. She stood across the passageway. Her gloved hands were crossed over her chest. Her red hair glowed in the light of the morning window. Her eyes were hard. She said she knew it was him. Caden asked what exactly it was. Evelyn raised her gloved hand. She said, "This." Caden was silent. Evelyn said she had examined the rune, that no such rune existed in any of the Academy's catalogs, that she couldn't determine the type of weave, that she couldn't understand how it worked, and that this frustrated her the most. Caden looked at her hard eyes, at her straight back,
at her gloved hands which were no longer trembling. He asked if it helped. Evelyn fell silent. Her stiffness wavered for a second. Then it returned. She said yes, it helps. But she hadn't asked for help. Caden nodded. He said he knew. He said she could return them if she didn't need them. Evelyn was silent for 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked away. The gloves remained on her. That day during the practical session, Caden noticed something. Master Hall sat at the back of the hall and watched. Not everyone. Him. She'd been doing it every day since the entrance exam, quietly, unnoticed by the others, but not by him. Caden knew that sooner or later she would approach him, a historian, a woman who had read the forbidden archives, a woman who recognized a 3-century-old rune at a glance. She knew, or suspected, and waited for confirmation. Caden gave her confirmation on the 6th day, on purpose. In the History of Magic class, the instructor was talking about the War of the Eclipse, the official version. The 4 great houses united and defeated the Dark Lord. Armies and strategy, the power of the purified, the triumph of noble blood. Caden listened. He was silent. Then he raised his hand. It was the first time Caden Ash had raised his hand in all his time as a student. The entire hall turned toward him. The instructor gave him permission to speak, clearly surprised. Caden asked one question. He asked what tactical maneuver the great houses had used during the siege of Crayholm. The instructor hesitated. The siege of Crayholm was a little-known episode. The textbook mentioned it in a single line. The instructor said it had been a flanking attack from the south. Caden nodded. He said he was grateful. He sat down and looked at Master Hall at the back of the hall. She was looking at him. Her face had gone pale. Because the siege of Cragholm was not in any modern textbook, it was mentioned only in the forbidden archives, and in those archives it was written that there had been no flanking attack. There was a defense, a 9-day one. One man against an army, without food, without reinforcements, without hope. The blacksmith's son from a border village. Master Hall knew this, and now she knew that Caden knew it too. Their eyes met across the room. Caden nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. Hall nodded back. A conversation without words. During the break, Professor Hall found him in the hallway. She approached, stopped beside him, remained silent. Then she said she wanted to show him something in the department archives. Caden agreed. They walked down the hallway in silence. two people who knew the truth about a world that had forgotten. The Department of the History of Magic archives were located in the north tower of the spire, a narrow spiral staircase, 112 steps. Caden counted them. Caden Ash's body was gasping for air by the 80th step. Magister Hall walked ahead and didn't look back. She gave him time to catch his breath without witnesses. He appreciated that. Upstairs was a round room with a low ceiling. Shelves from floor to ceiling, scrolls, books, folders with yellowed pages, dust, lots of dust. No one had been in here for months. Master Hall closed the door. She turned to him. She was silent for a few seconds. Then she said that the rune on the staff during the entrance exam was the rune of the single resonance. Caden didn't answer. Hall continued. She said that this rune is described in only one source, in the diary of a field mage named Torvin, who served in the hero squad 300 years ago. The diary is kept here in this archive, under lock and key, under 3 seals. Its contents are known to 2 people at the academy, her and the rector. Caden remained silent. Hall walked over to one of the shelves. She pulled out a thin book with a leather binding. She placed it on the table between them. Caden looked at the book. Torvin. He remembered Torvin, a short, red-haired man with perpetually dirty fingernails. A field mage. Not strong, but stubborn. He'd survived 3 battles and 2 poisonings. He kept a diary every day because he was afraid that if he were killed, no one would remember what had really happened. Torvin was right. No one remembered, except for the diary. Hall opened the book to the bookmark. She turned it toward Caden. He looked. A drawing. The rune of single resonance, drawn by Torvin's hand with a note that only Arius did it this way and that no other mage in the squad could replicate it. Next to the drawing were words. Caden read them silently, to himself. Torvin wrote that Arius didn't cast runes for himself, but for others, that his magic worked better in the hands of others than in his own, that this contradicted everything they knew about magic, and that Arius simply shrugged when asked how. Caden closed the book. He looked at Hall. She was waiting. She didn't demand an answer. She was waiting, patiently, like a scientist waits for the results of an experiment. No pressure, no rush. Caden said that he had a question. Hall nodded. Caden asked if she knew what had actually happened to the hero. Hall answered. She said that, according to archival records, the hero Arius Worgen had perished while creating the Great Seal. He had used his own soul as a lock, an exchange, life for the seal. After that, the great houses declared themselves the victors. They erased his name. They rewrote history. Hall spoke in an even voice, without anger, without bitterness, like a historian who had long since outgrown all emotion and retained only the facts. Caden nodded. He asked why she had shown him the diary. Hall paused. Then she said that on the southern borders they were finding burned-out villages with seals that hadn't been seen in 3 centuries. That the Order of the Silver Spire was sending out observers. That they were looking for a child with anomalous channels. And that she wanted to find him first. Not for the Order, not for the house, for herself. Because if the hero has somehow returned, then he deserves to have at least one person in this world on his side. Caden looked at her. A 41-year-old woman, a historian, the only one in the department. She had spent her entire career proving she had a right to be here. She had read forbidden archives not for power, but for the truth. And now she stood before him, offering protection to a man she wasn't even sure she had found. Caden made his decision in 3 seconds. He said that the siege of Craigholm had lasted not 5 days, 10. On the 10th day, reinforcements arrived from the village of Hollow. 17 militiamen.
farmers and fishermen. They didn't know how to fight, but they brought food. And the man who had gone 9 days without food sat down for the first time in all that time and wept. Not out of joy, out of shame, because he had forgotten that it was possible to ask for help. Hall listened. Her face didn't change, only her hands. His hands clenched the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. When Caden fell silent, she didn't speak for a long time. Then she asked how he knew that. Caden answered. He said he had been there. The silence in the archive lasted a full minute. Somewhere below, the bell rang for lunch. Somewhere beyond the wall, the wind whistled through the stone joints of the tower. Hall slowly sat down in a chair. She looked up at him, at the skinny 17-year-old boy in a worn gray uniform, at the scholarship student with dirty sewers, at the empty space on the 3rd floor. And she saw the one who stood behind those eyes. She said one word.
His name. Not Caden, another one, his real one. Arius. Caden didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. Hall nodded. She stood up, walked to the door, turned around. Said that from this moment on, she'd cover for him. No matter what he did, no matter what happened, she would cover for him. Caden asked why. Hall looked at him, and for the first time during their entire conversation, her face flinched. She said she had spent her whole life studying the man who saved the world and was forgotten, that she wouldn't let it happen twice. Caden stood in the empty archive. Torvin's diary lay on the table. He ran his fingers over the leather binding. Torvin, a stubborn, red-haired man, who kept a diary because he feared. The diary survived. Torvin did not, but the words remained. Caden went down the stairs, 112 steps. His body wasn't gasping for breath. His body felt light, like after you take a heavy load off your shoulders. For the first time in 3 centuries, someone knew who he was, and didn't want to kill him for it. Mira was waiting for him in the dining hall, as always. She was sitting in his spot and his porridge. Caden sat down across from her. Mira pushed a second bowl toward him, full, with butter. Caden looked at the butter, then at Mira. She shrugged, said she'd stolen it from the aristocratic dining hall. Caden said that stealing was wrong. Mira replied that the aristocrats had plenty of butter. Caden couldn't think of a counter-argument. He ate the porridge with butter. Caden Ash's body was happy. After lunch, Mira shared the news. Her brother, Derek Ashton, had noticed that Caden's debt was shrinking. 8 silver coins had already been repaid. Derek was surprised, not angry, just surprised. He wasn't used to scholarship students paying back their debts. Mira said that Derek wasn't a bad person, just stupid. Caden nodded. He knew the difference between malice and stupidity better than anyone. Malice is dangerous. Stupidity can be cured. Mira also said that new people had arrived at the academy, 2 of them, a man and a woman in gray cloaks without insignia, observers. Caden stopped chewing. Observers from the Order, the very ones Hall had mentioned. They're already here, sooner than he expected. Mira said they walk around the classes and watch the students, that the teachers were nervous, that the dean was walking around with the kind of expression people usually have when they want to hit someone but can't. Caden finished his porridge. He stood up. He thanked Mira for the oil and for the information. Mira looked up at him and told him to be careful, without a smile, seriously, for the first time ever. Caden looked at her, a 16-year-old girl with freckles who steals oil for a scholarship student, and who sensed the danger before he even told her. He nodded. He said he would. That evening in the workshop, Caden sat alone. Lorana hadn't come, for the first time in a week. He wasn't worried. She had her own business. He picked up the cracked wand from the table and began to work. Not a rune, not a spell, just repairing the crack. Slowly, carefully.
just as he repaired everything. With his fingers, with his intent, with a quiet resonance through which no modern detector could detect magic. If observers are looking for anomalous channels, they're looking for spikes, bright flashes of mana, traces of spells, things he doesn't leave behind. His technique is invisible to their instruments because their instruments are built on principles that have forgotten the most important thing. Mana isn't a stream. Mana is intention. You don't push water through a pipe. You ask the water to flow. The difference between a hammer and a needle, between a scream and a whisper. The observers are looking for a scream. He speaks in a whisper.
Caden repaired the crack in the staff. The staff became whole, not new, whole, with a scar where the crack had been, like the quartz of Mira, like all the things he had repaired, with traces of the past, but alive. The observers walked through the academy for 12 days, a man and a woman, both in gray cloaks, both with faces that expressed nothing. They attended every class, they stood by the walls, they watched. Sometimes one of them would take a small device out of their pocket and point it toward the students, a mana detector. Caden understood the principle, crude, primitive. The device picked up mana fluctuations within a 20-step radius and recorded anomalies, any spike above normal, any non-standard pattern. Caden stopped working with mana on academy grounds, completely. He even turned silent resonance down to 0. He fixed with his hands whatever could be fixed with his hands. He put the rest aside. On the 5th day of observation, the detector reacted to Isla brag.
She was standing in a practical class, trying to repeat an exercise that Caden had taught her a week ago. To gather fire from the moisture in the air. She was managing it. Poorly, but she was managing it. And the detector picked it up, because the technique of gathering fire from the moisture in the air didn't exist in modern textbooks. It was a technique from 3 centuries ago. And the detector recognized the mana pattern as anomalous. A male observer approached Isla. He asked where she knew this spell from. Isla turned pale. She glanced at Caden. Caden wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the wall, counting the cracks in the plaster. Isla said she'd read it in the library, in an old book. She didn't remember the title. The observer looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded and walked away. He jotted something down in his notebook. After class, Caden found Isla in the hallway. She was standing by the window and her hands were shaking. Not from exhaustion, like Evelyn.
From fear. Caden stood beside her. He didn't touch her. He didn't comfort her. He just stood there. A minute later, Isla spoke. She asked what was going on, why that man had approached her, what he was looking for. Caden told the truth, part of it. He said that the observers were looking for students who used unconventional techniques, that her spell had seemed unusual to them, that she needed to stop using it in class. Isla looked at him. She asked why. Caden said he couldn't explain it yet, but that she needed to trust him. Isla was silent. Then she nodded. Trust. Such a simple word. Such a heavy one. Caden returned to the workshop and thought. He had made a mistake. He had taught Isla a technique that had attracted attention. Too soon, too openly. The hero from his past life never made such mistakes. But the hero from his past life didn't teach 17-year-old girls. He fought in wars. And in war, the mistakes are different. He needed to change his approach.
Teach not the technique, but the principle. Not show how to do it, but explain why it works, so that the student arrives at the result in their own way, and no detector will recognize the pattern because the pattern will be unique. The next day, Caden did 2 things. First, he found Isla before breakfast and explained to her the principle of obtaining fire from moisture. Not the technique, the principle. Moisture is water. Water contains oxygen. Oxygen burns. You don't create fire. You release it from what is already there. How you do it depends on you, on your channels, on your hand, on your intention. There is no right way. There is your way. Isla listened. Her eyes changed. Fear receded. Understanding came. She nodded, said she'd try. Second, Caden went to see Master Hall. He told her about the detector and Isla. Hall frowned. She said the observers would stay for another week, that she could divert their attention away from Isla, but not forever. Caden asked if it was possible to find out exactly who had sent the observers. Hall paused. Then she gave a single name. Archmage D. Raven Ashton. Caden froze. Ashton. Mira's uncle. A member of the conclave of the Purified Lines. Hall told him about him. A little. What she knew. Draven Ashton oversaw security along the southern borders. He was the first to receive reports of the burned villages. He was the first to recognize the seals. And he was the first to realize what he was looking for. Not a monster. Not a dark mage. A hero. Because only a hero could have placed those seals. And only the hero's blood could overwrite them, or break them completely. To Draven Ashton, the hero was a threat, not to the darkness, to the system. A commoner who saved the world. That's a story that destroys everything on which the power of the great houses rests. The Purified Lines, the right of blood, the sealing of the channels.
If a commoner could do what the archmages could not, then the entire system was a lie, and 3 centuries of privilege built on nothing. Driven wasn't evil. Caden understood that. Driven was a man who believed that order was more important than truth, that stability is more important than justice, that peace for thousands is worth the life of one. Caden knew people like that. He had met them in both of his lives, the most dangerous enemies, because they kill without hatred, with a clear conscience, for the good of the world. All asked what he was going to do. Caden replied, "Nothing. Nothing for now." He would be quiet. He would be invisible. He would be a scholarship student with dirty sewers, fixing other people's things for a silver coin. The observers seek strength. He will show weakness. They seek an anomaly. He will show normality. They seek a hero. He will show a boy. All nodded, but there was doubt in her eyes. She asked how long he could hide like that. Caden didn't answer, because he didn't know. The observers left after 8 days. They found nothing. Isla stopped using the fire-gathering technique in class. The detector no longer went off. The male observer walked past Caden in the hallway on the last day, literally right past him. Didn't turn his head, didn't notice. A scholarship student with dirty channels, an empty space, invisible. Caden stood against the wall, breathing evenly. His heart was beating 60 times a minute. Perfect calm. He knew how to vanish. He'd learned it in a past life when he was hiding from the Dark Lord's scouts in the forests of Craigholm. Not the magic of invisibility, the absence of presence. You don't become invisible, you become insignificant. A gaze glides over you and doesn't linger. The mind registers you and immediately forgets you. You are part of the wall, part of the floor, part of the dust. The observer walked past. Caden exhaled. But one pair of eyes had noticed him. Sunhwa Yoon stood at the end of the corridor and looked at him. She saw him standing there. She saw the observer walk past. She saw the man become invisible without moving. Yoon was the daughter of mercenaries. She had been taught to spot those who hide. It was her job, her life. She knew how to see what others couldn't, and she saw Caden, not the boy scholar, a man who knew how to vanish professionally. Their eyes met. Caden didn't look away. Yoon didn't look away. 5 seconds. 10. Then Yoon tilted her head slightly, not a nod, an acknowledgement. She acknowledged him as an equal, as someone who lived in the same world of shadows where she lived. And she didn't ask a single question. She turned and walked away. With his stiletto hidden under his uniform, Caden stood in the empty hallway, and for the first time in 12 days of tension, he allowed himself to smile. A month at the academy, Caden had earned 32 silver coins. 18 remained until his debt to Derek Ashton was fully paid off. His body had gained weight, a little, but enough for his ribs to stop sticking out under his uniform. Caden ate 3 times a day, meat every other day, butter every morning. Mira monitored this like a project. She brought food from the aristocratic dining hall with a regularity that spoke to a systematic approach. Caden stopped arguing. His body was changing, slowly. The channels remained weak, dirty by the system's standards. But Caden felt they were adapting, not becoming cleaner. They were becoming more flexible, like a muscle getting used to the strain. He didn't push it. He gave his body time. Morning lectures became a routine. Caden sat in the back row. He was silent. He took notes. He found errors in every third explanation. He didn't correct them. He memorized them. The errors were systemic, not random typos, but shifts in understanding that had accumulated over centuries, like a crack in the quartz of Mira. Imperceptible at first, catastrophic later. For example, modern mana theory claimed that the body's channels had a fixed capacity. Born with narrow channels, that meant a low ceiling, forever. That was a lie. The channels weren't pipes, but living tissue. They grew, they changed, they adapted. But only if you knew how to work with them. And no one knew that, because those who did lived 300 years ago. A second example, runes. Modern mages drew runes from a template, like children tracing the outlines of letters. They knew the shape, but didn't understand why the shape was exactly that way. Caden remembered why. Every line of a rune isn't a symbol, but a route, a path along which mana moves from the entry point to the exit point. Change the route, and the rune works differently. Better, worse, different. Modern mages didn't change the route. They were afraid, because they didn't understand. Caden wrote down the mistakes in a separate notebook, not for himself, for those who would come after, for the students he would someday begin to teach, if he lived long enough. The practical sessions were more interesting. During them, Caden observed, not the instructor, the students. Evelyn Valcrest worked with mana as if it were mathematics, precise, calculated, every movement calibrated, every rune perfect in form. The results were consistently high. But Caden saw a ceiling. She was hitting it and didn't understand why. Because she believed that magic was a formula. But magic is intention. A formula yields 80%. Intention yields 100. Evelyn made up for that 20% difference with hard work, 4 hours of sleep, shaking hands, the gloves he made for her. She worked for 10 people to cover up what could have been covered up with understanding. Caden didn't interfere. It wasn't time yet. Evelyn wouldn't accept help from a scholarship student. She accepted the gloves because she didn't know who they were from. Now she knows, and she's angry. Not at him, at herself, for accepting them, for letting them help, for letting someone see her weakness. She'll come on her own, when she's ready. Isla Bragg was mastering the principle that Caden had explained to her, slowly but correctly. She found her own way to gather fire, not from the moisture in the air, as he had shown her at first, from the heat of her own body. She redirected excess heat from her palm to a point in front of her, and it flared up into a small, steady flame. The technique was her own. No detector would recognize an ancient pattern in it, because it was a new pattern, her pattern. Caden watched this and felt something akin to pride, not for himself, for her.
A master is not the one who does it themselves. A master is the one who shows another that they can. Manhwa Yun behaved differently after that day in the hallway. She no longer spoke. She no longer asked questions. But Caden noticed that she was nearby. In the dining hall. In the hallway. In class. Not intrusively, not ostentatiously, just nearby. Like a shadow that had decided it had a master. One evening, Caden left the workshop late. It was 1 in the morning. The hallway was empty and dark. He was walking toward the stairs when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around. Yoon was standing 10 paces away, a stiletto in her hand. Not pointed at him, just in her hand, like an extension of her fingers. Caden asked why she was there. Yoon that she was seeing him out. Caden asked what from. Yoon paused. Then she said that he wasn't being watched only by observers. Caden froze. Yoon explained. Briefly. Precisely. Like someone accustomed to reporting. A senior from the Ashton family. Not Derek, another one. Tyron Ashton. Archmage Driven Ashton's grandnephew. He'd been watching Caden for the past 4 days, keeping track of who came to his workshop, taking notes. Caden listened. He thought. The Order's observers had left, finding nothing, but Driven Ashton hadn't stopped. He left his eyes at the academy. A relative who looks like an ordinary student. Smart. Very smart. Caden asked Yoon how she knew. Yoon looked at him with that long, unblinking gaze. And she said that spotting those who are watching is her job. She was taught this from childhood. Her clan made a living from it. Caden nodded. He asked why she was telling him this. Yoon was silent for 5 seconds. 10. Then she said that he had made a dagger for her that fit in her hand like a second finger. That no one had ever made her something that was just for her. Just for her. Not for work, not for the clan. For her. Caden watched her in the dark corridor. A 17-year-old girl with 2 daggers under her uniform, who had been taught to be a weapon, who didn't know how to want things for herself, and who, for the first time in her life, was doing something not because she was ordered to, but because she had decided for herself. He said, "Thank you." Yoon nodded, turned around, walked into the darkness, silently, as if she had never been there. Caden stood in the hallway and thought about Tyron Ashton. 4 days of surveillance. So Tyron had seen Lorana. He'd seen her come to the workshop every evening. He'd seen Mira. He'd seen Ayla. He saw everyone who came to see him, and reported it to his uncle. That was the problem. Not for Caden, for them. If Driven decided Caden was dangerous, he wouldn't strike at Caden. He'd strike at those around him, at his connections, at his weak spots, at the girls who come to the scholarship students' workshop. Caden went up to his room, lay down on the bed. Didn't sleep until dawn. He thought. By morning, he'd made a decision. He wouldn't hide. To hide is to be afraid, and fear attracts attention. He'd stay in plain sight, out in the open. A scholarship student who fixes things. Nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary. Just a boy with skilled hands. Let Tyron report. Let Driven listen. Let them see what he wants them to see. A boy, not a hero. The first month was over. The second had begun. Derek Ashton's debt had been reduced to 12 silver coins. Coyden was repairing things steadily, 2 or 3 items a day. Rumors about him spread through the academy like a crack in glass, quietly, irresistibly. He was known, not by name, by nickname. The workshop,
That's what they said. Take it to the workshop. He'll fix it. It wasn't just scholarship students who came to him, younger aristocrats too, those who were too ashamed to go to the family craftsman with a trivial breakage, were those who begrudged paying the family craftsman 10 gold coins for what Caden did for a silver coin. He charged the same price to everyone, a silver coin, sometimes a copper one, sometimes bread. He didn't haggle, he didn't refuse, he just repaired. Every item that left his hands carried a small, invisible signature, not a rune, not a symbol, a vibration, the finest tuning to the owner. An amulet he repaired for one person didn't work as well in someone else's hands, because it was tuned to specific fingers, to a specific skin temperature, to a specific heartbeat. No one noticed this. They just felt that the item was better after the repair than it had been before it broke, as if the break had been necessary, as if something alive had slipped inside through the crack. One morning, Evelyn Valcrest came to the workshop. Caden wasn't expecting her. She stood in the doorway and looked at him with that gaze that made you want to check if all your buttons were fastened. Analytical, penetrating, merciless. She said she wanted to ask him a question. Caden nodded. Evelyn asked how the rune on the gloves worked. Caden thought for a moment. Then he answered. He explained the principle, not the whole thing, just enough for her to grasp the essence, but not enough to replicate it. The rune compensated for the microspasms in the hand muscles through feedback. It read the nerve impulses in the fingers and sent a counter-impulse, like a second hand gently holding the first. Evelyn listened. She didn't interrupt, she didn't nod, she just listened. When Caden finished, she was silent for 30 seconds. Then she said that this principle wasn't described in a single textbook on runic engineering, that she had checked all 72 volumes in the library, all 72. Caden looked at her. He asked when she had managed to read 72 volumes. Evelyn replied that she'd done it over the past 3 weeks. Caden was silent. 3 weeks, 72 volumes, on 4 hours of sleep, with a full course load, along with her duties as class representative. This girl was working with an intensity that would have killed an adult mage in 6 months. And she did it in silence, without complaint, without for help, because Valcrests don't ask. Valcrests take, or make it happen themselves. Caden said the principle was an old one, not from modern books, from another time. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. She asked, from which one? Caden replied that it was from a time when magic was still understood, not copied. Evelyn was silent for a moment. Then she said she wanted to learn. Not from him. Caden nodded. He understood. She didn't want to be a scholarship student's apprentice. She wants knowledge, without hierarchy, without subordination, like a scientist wants data. Caden proposed an exchange. He would explain to her the principles not found in textbooks. She would help him with the theoretical foundation that Caden Ash had missed during his 3 failed years. They both pretended it was a mutually beneficial deal, not that one is teaching the other. Evelyn looked at him. For the first time during the entire conversation, the corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile, a shadow of a smile, a ghost of a smile. She said that the terms were acceptable. Caden nodded. They started that very evening. Evelyn brought her notes, her own. Perfect. Every formula written in neat, small handwriting. Every diagram drawn with a ruler. Caden looked at them and saw the work. Thousands of hours of work. Sleepless nights. Trembling hands. A pen that scratched the expensive paper of her family. He remembered. A pen. He hadn't made her a pen yet. One that doesn't scratch. Later. Now he was flipping through the notes and pointing out her mistakes. Not her mistakes, the system's mistakes. This formula is wrong. Not because Evelyn made a mistake, because there's a typo in the textbook, which is 200 years old. This diagram shows the flow of mana in the body, but 3 channels aren't marked. They were left out when they were copied from copies.
This rune is drawn in mirror image, not in her notes, in the original source. For 200 years, all the mages in the world have been drawing the rune in mirror image and wondering why it yields 70% instead of 100. Evelyn listened, and with every passing minute, her face changed. The stiffness faded. Something. Hunger. Intellectual hunger. She wasn't hungry for food, but for knowledge. Real knowledge. Not what they taught in textbooks. The kind that actually worked. They worked for 4 hours. Caden showed her 12 errors in the basic course on mana theory. Evelyn wrote down every one. She checked every one. She recalculated the formulas with the corrections. The results matched. Each corrected formula yielded a more accurate result than the original. At the 12th error, Evelyn set down her pen. She looked at her gloved hands, then at Caden, and asked the question he had been waiting for since day one. She asked who he really was. Caden answered, "A scholarship student, 3rd floor, dirty sewers." Evelyn shook her head. She said that a scholarship student couldn't know what he knew. That 3 failed years didn't add up to 12 mistakes that no teacher had ever seen. That his hands repair objects in a way that doesn't exist, and that she wouldn't leave until she understood. Caden looked at her. A brilliant girl, the top student, who doesn't sleep or eat properly, who read 72 volumes in 3 weeks, who doesn't accept help but accepts knowledge. He couldn't tell her the truth. Not because he didn't trust her, because the truth would put her in danger. Driven Ashton, Tyron, the observers. The less she knows, the safer she is. Caden said he was a man who had read a lot, and that some of the books were old, very old. That didn't satisfy Evelyn, but she didn't press the issue. She was smart enough to realize that insisting would get her nowhere. She gathered her notes, stood up, stopped at the door, said she'd come back tomorrow, with new questions. Caden nodded.
When she left, he took a thin steel blank out of a drawer in the workshop. A quill. He began making a quill for Evelyn Valcrest. The nib was made of steel, thin, flexible, with micro runes on the inside. The rune was simple. It reduced friction between the metal and the paper by a third, enough for the quill to glide across the Valcrest family's fine paper as if on butter. No scratches, no squeaking, without a trace of effort, so that Evelyn could write her perfect notes without wasting a single drop of energy on it. He worked for an hour. The pen turned out beautiful, simple, functional, just like everything else he did. In the morning, he would leave it on her desk without a note. She would be angry, then she would get used to it. 2 months at the academy, Caden had paid off his debt to Derek Ashton in full, 50 silver coins. He'd brought the last 8 in person. He went up to the 4th floor of the aristocratic wing. He knocked on the door. Derek Ashton opened it. Tall,
broad-shouldered, light hair, a face accustomed to looking down on others. He saw Caden and for a few seconds couldn't remember who he was. Then he remembered. The scholarship student from the 3rd floor. The debtor. Caden held out the purse of coins and said the debt was paid off, in full. Derek took the purse. He held it in the palm of his hand. He looked at Caden with an expression that was closer to bewilderment than anything else. Scholarships didn't pay back debts. Never. They let the interest pile up and transferred schools, or dropped out, or endured it and silently bore the humiliation until graduation. No one ever came back with the full amount 2 months later. Derek asked where the money came from. Caden replied that he'd earned it, through a trade. Derek snorted. He said that a scholarship student, craftsman, was something new. Caden didn't answer. He turned around. He left. Behind him, Derek stood in the doorway and watched him go. He was thinking. Mira told Caden later that Derek had been asking about him all evening, not maliciously, out of curiosity. Who this boy was, what he repairs, how he repairs it, and why everyone who brings him broken things comes back again. Mira answered evasively. She was talkative, but not stupid. She knew what to say and what not to say. Midway through the second month, the midterm exams were approaching. The whole class was nervous. The aristocrats were training in the halls. The scholarship students were cramming in the library. Caden was preparing in his own way. He knew the exams would reveal his level. Caden Ash's official level. And that level had to be low. Low enough not to attract attention, high enough not to get kicked out. A balance, as fine as a knife's edge. He trained himself to cast spells poorly, deliberately, with control. It was harder than casting them well. A good spell requires skill. A bad spell that looks naturally bad requires twice the skill. You have to know what mistakes a weak mage makes. Which failure patterns look plausible? What percentage of power is considered normal for a scholar with dirty channels? Caden practiced in the workshop late at night. He lit a candle, blowed it out, lit it again. Each time slightly off, slightly weak, slightly wrong. The art of being mediocre, the most difficult of the arts. 2 days before the evaluation, Lorana came to the workshop earlier than usual. Caden was sitting at the workbench, sharpening a knife. An ordinary knife, not a magical one, just a knife. His hands needed work. His body calmed down when his hands were busy, a habit from a past life. Arius was always doing something with his hands, forging, repairing, sharpening, planing. Hands that don't work are hands that forget. Lorana sat down on her box. She was silent longer than usual. Then she said her grandfather was dying. Caden stopped sharpening. He looked at her. She sat upright, back straight, hands on her knees. Face calm. And only from the way she clenched her fingers into the fabric of her skirt could he see that inside everything was tearing apart. Caden put down his knife. He sat down on another crate, across from her. Not next to her, across from her, at arm's length. Lorana spoke. Her grandfather was the last man of the Maringan clan, the last to remember the voice of the blade before it fell silent. The last to believe the clan could still be reborn. Now he was fading. The disease of the channels. Burnout. Slow. Irreversible. The healers gave him 6 months, maybe less. Lorana said grandfather had asked for the blade to be brought. He wanted to hear it before he died. After that, she fell silent. Caden knew she hadn't finished. He waited. Lorana looked up. She asked if the blade sang loud enough for a dying old man to hear. Caden looked into her gray eyes. He remembered other eyes, just as gray, just as quiet. 300 years ago, another girl, another question. The same pain. He answered. He said the blade sang with her voice, and that her grandfather would recognize that voice. Because Lorana, his granddaughter. Because in her voice there is a part of his voice, a part of her mother's voice, a part of the voices of all the women of the clan who have ever held this blade. She is not a copy, she is a continuation. Lorana listened. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. Just like then, the first time, when the blade rang out. She said she would go visit her grandfather over the weekend. Caden nodded. Lorana stood up. She walked over to him. Close. She reached out her hand. She touched his shoulder. Gently. Just a touch, like the touch of a butterfly. She said that sometimes it seemed to her that he knew things a 17-year-old boy couldn't possibly know. Caden didn't answer. Lorana withdrew her hand. She said it didn't scare her. She left. Caden sat on the box and felt the warmth on his shoulder, where her fingers had been. Caden Ash's body remembered that touch, and so did the hero from his past life. Graduation day, the Great Hall, all the teachers, all the students, the examination committee at a long table, Master Hall in the corner, and one person Caden hadn't expected, Archmaster Driven Ashton. He was sitting in the guest chair to the right of the committee, graying, charming, with a warm smile that didn't reach his eyes. Caden saw him, and everything inside him went cold. Driven had come in person. He hadn't sent tele-observers. He'd come himself. That meant Tyron had reported something interesting. Something that had made the head of security for the southern borders drop everything and come to the academy for a routine evaluation. Caden joined the line of students and waited his turn. His hands were steady. His face was impassive. His heart was beating at 60 beats per minute. Perfect calm. He was a boy, a scholarship student, a blank slate. Evelyn was the first to be evaluated. Brilliantly. Every spell was perfect, every rune in place. The committee recorded the highest score. Driven nodded approvingly. Valcrest, strong blood, clear channels, everything as it should be. Isla passed the assessment with a solid average score. Not brilliant, but confident. The fire from the warmth of her palm burned evenly and steadily. The committee noted the unconventional technique. The practical instructors said it was an original method. Driven raised an eyebrow. He looked at Isla. He jotted something down. Caden noticed this. It was Caden's turn. He stepped into the center of the hall. He took his wand. Repaired. Intact. Without a rune. An ordinary wand. He raised it. He cast a fire spell. A basic one, from the textbook. A flame shot out of the wand. Small. Yellow. Uneven. 25% of maximum power. Standard for a scholarship student with dirty channels. The committee recorded his score. Low, passing, but low. Caden lowered his wand. He turned toward the table. Driven was watching him for a few seconds. Then he shifted his gaze to the next student. It slipped. Didn't catch. Caden walked past. He returned to the line. His heart was beating at 60 beats per minute. Steady, clear, quiet. Master Hall in the corner exhaled. Caden saw it out of the corner of his eye. She was nervous too. After the evaluation, Caden stepped out into the hallway. Mira intercepted him by the stairs. She was pale. She said that Uncle Driven was here, that she hadn't known, that he'd arrived without warning. Caden asked if he did that often. Mira shook her head. She said that Uncle Driven never did anything without a reason, that if he was here, it meant something had happened, or that someone had said something. She looked at Caden. There was something new in her freckled face. Fear, not for herself, for him. Caden placed his hand on her head, gently, like an older brother, and told her not to worry. That everything was fine. That he was just a scholarship student, nothing interesting. Mira brushed his hand off her head, with the dignity of a 16-year-old girl who doesn't want to be patted on the head like a child. And she said he was lying, and that she knew he was lying, and that she wouldn't leave. Caden looked at her, small, red-haired, with freckles, with eyes that burned with the stubbornness of the entire Ashton family, and who had taken his side, not knowing what was behind it, simply because he had repaired the family clock and didn't want praise. He nodded, said he knew. Mira snorted, turned around, and left, with her back straight, like an aristocrat, because that's what she was. That evening, Caden lay on the bed, the ceiling, cracks in the plaster, candlelight shadows. Driven Ashton saw him, watched, and turned away. But that meant nothing. Driven was smart enough not to show interest, patient enough to wait. Caden closed his eyes.
He sensed a mark to the south, distant, faint, aching. It was growing weaker every day, slowly but surely, like a candle burning out. And when it burned out, what would begin to seep through it? The Dark Lord, or what was left of him. Caden had time, 6 months, maybe a year, no more. He had to be ready. They all had to be ready. All the girls sitting next to him on the crates in the workshop, who brought him broken things, who didn't leave when he said everything was fine. This time he wouldn't stand alone, not because he couldn't, because he doesn't want to. Because last time he stood alone and the world forgot him. This time everyone will stand, and it's harder to forget everyone. Lorana returned from her grandfather's after 3 days. Caden was waiting for her in the workshop. He wouldn't admit it, but he was waiting. She entered quietly, closed the door, sat down on her crate. She was silent for a minute. Then she said her grandfather had been crying. Caden didn't ask for details. He waited. Lorana told him. She had drawn her blade before the old man, raised it. The blade sang, a single note, her note, soft, pure, high. The old man lay on a bed in the Morrigan family estate, a dark room, candles, the scent of herbs and medicines. He hadn't heard the blade's song in 100 years, not since his mother last raised the blade and it answered her. Then his mother died. The silence. And the old man decided that the line had ended, that they were unworthy, that the blood had thinned to water. And now his granddaughter stands before him and the blade sings, not with her mother's voice, not with her grandmother's voice, with Lorana's voice, a new voice, one that had never before been heard within the walls of this house. The old man wept. Lorana did too. She told the story in an even voice, but her fingers clenched the fabric of her skirt until her knuckles turned white. Caden listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort. He just listened. When she finished, he asked how her grandfather was feeling. Lorana said that her grandfather had asked her to raise the blade one more time. And again. And again. 3 times. Each time the blade sang. And each time the old man closed his eyes and smiled, like a man who could finally fall asleep. She said that her grandfather had asked who had repaired the blade. She answered, a boy from the academy, a scholarship student. Grandfather asked for the name. She told him, Caden Ash. Grandfather was silent. Then he said the name didn't matter. What mattered was that the hands remembered. Lorana didn't understand what he meant. Caden did. The old man saw, or sensed, at the level of blood, at the level of ancestral memory, that the blade hadn't been repaired using modern technology, that the rune that had restored his voice had come from another time. The old man didn't know who, but he knew where. It was dangerous. Caden asked if the old man had told anyone. Lorana shook her head. She said the old man hadn't spoken to outsiders in 2 years, only to her. Caden nodded. Good. So far, so good. Lorana looked at him for a long time and asked him one thing. She asked why, when he looked at her, he looked guilty. Caden froze. He hadn't expected that. He should have expected it. The girl was observant. Quiet, but observant. She saw his glances, all of them. Every time he caught himself looking for Selena's features in her. Every time he looked away because he found them. Every time he smiled, not at her, but at the ghost behind her shoulder. She saw it all. Caden didn't answer. He didn't lie. He didn't brush it off. He just stayed silent. Lorana nodded, as if the silence were an answer. She stood up, walked to the door, turned around, said she didn't know who he was looking at when he looked at her, but that she could feel it, and that one day he would tell her, when he was ready. She would wait. She left. Caden sat in the workshop staring at the closed door. A 1,000-year-old soul in a 17-year-old body, and a girl who could see right through him without knowing who he was. 2 things happened the following week. First, Tyrone Ashton came to the workshop. The door was open in the afternoon. He knocked. He came in. Short, thin, dark hair, eyes that remember everything they see. He placed a broken ring bearing the Ashton family seal on the workbench. He said he'd heard about a craftsman who repairs things for a silver coin. Caden took the ring. He looked at it. The seal was intact. The ring was cracked along the rim. Just ordinary metal fatigue. 5 minutes work. Caden fixed it. He gave it back. Tyron placed the silver coin on the workbench. He looked around the workshop, at the tools, at Lorana's box in the corner, at the shavings from Evelyn's pen on the floor, at everything, memorizing it all. Then he looked at Caden. He thanked him. He left.
Caden stood there thinking. Tyron hadn't come to have the ring repaired. He came to look, with his own eyes, for Driven. Now Driven knows what the workshop looks like, knows that Lorana comes here, knows that Evelyn does too. It was reconnaissance, pure, professional, no threats, no pressure, just data collection. The second incident. Master Hall summoned Caden to the archives. She closed the door. Her face was serious. She said that she had received a report from the southern borders through her channels. Not official, personal, from a former student who served in the border garrison. 2 more villages burned. Seals on the ground. Old ones, 300 years old. But now the pattern had changed. Before, the seals were intact, just weakened. Now they were split, intentionally. Someone was breaking them. Not time, not wear and tear. A person, or a creature. Caden listened and felt a chill rising inside him. Not fear, recognition. He knew that handwriting. The seals weren't being broken from the outside, from the inside. Something was pressing against them from the other side, from beyond the barrier. The Dark Lord, or his echo, that part of the power that remained behind the seal when Arius closed it with his body. It was awakening, slowly but surely. And every time another seal burst, Caden felt it, like a stab in the chest, as if someone were pulling a string tied to his ribs, because his soul was part of those seals. He was the lock, and the lock was falling apart. Hall asked how much time was left. Caden estimated, by feel, by the strength of those stabs, by the frequency. He said 6 months, maybe 4 months. Hall turned pale. She asked what would happen when all the seals fell. Caden answered honestly. He said he didn't know. Last time the Dark Lord came with an army, with creatures from beyond the border, with magic that scorched all life within a radius of miles. But last time he was whole. Now he might be something. A fragment, a shard, an echo, strong enough to destroy a few villages, but not enough to threaten the entire continent. Or maybe not. Caden didn't know, and that uncertainty was the scariest part of all. Hall asked what to do. Caden said one word: train. Hall didn't understand. Caden explained. Last time, the world had staked everything on a single person, on a hero. It had worked, once, at the cost of a life, at the cost of a soul, at the cost of 3 centuries of oblivion. It must not happen again. This time, we don't need heroes. We need masters. People who understand the principles, who can repair the seals, who can stand together, not alone. All of them. Hall listened. Then she nodded, slowly, like a person making a decision from which there is no turning back. She said she would help, that she would grant him access to the archives, that she would cover for him with the rector, that she would find students willing to truly learn. Caden looked at her.
A woman who had spent her whole life proving her right to a professorship, and who was now risking everything she had earned, for the sake of the truth, for the sake of the boy with the dirty sewers, for the sake of a world that had forgotten and would forget again. He said, "Thank you." Hall waved her hand. She said, "Thanks could wait. Right now, they needed a plan." Caden nodded. He went down to the workshop, sat down at the workbench, took out the notebook with the mistakes from the textbooks, opened a blank page, and began to write. Not mistakes, principles, those very ones, the ones the world had forgotten over 3 centuries, the ones he remembered, the ones that needed to be passed on. He formulated each principle so that a freshman could understand it, in simple words, without terms that didn't exist in modern language. Mana is intention, not a flow. A rune is a path, not a symbol. Channels are living tissue, not pipes.
A spell is a conversation with the world, not a command. It's easier to fix than to break. Understanding is more important than repeating. For a specific person, not for everyone. He wrote until morning, 20 pages. The basics, the foundation, the beginning of what would someday become a new school, or an old school restored. In the morning, he went to class, with a notebook in his inside pocket, with a plan in his head, with 4 months until the end of the world. Caden began teaching a week later, not officially, not publicly, in the workshop, in the evenings. 5 people came: Isla, Evelyn, Lirana, Yoon, Mira. He didn't call them, they came on their own, each for her own reason. Isla, because she wanted to understand the principle, not just repeat the technique. Evelyn, because her thirst for knowledge was stronger than her pride. Lirana, because the workshop had become her place. Yoon, because she decided her place was by his side. Mira, because Mira went everywhere. The first lesson. Caden placed a candle on the workbench, an ordinary one, beeswax, a linen wick. He asked each of them to light it. Everyone lit it, in their own way. Isla, with the warmth of her palm. Evelyn, with a classic spell through a wand. Lirana, with a gentle touch. Yoon, with a snap of her fingers, quickly, abruptly, like mercenaries. Mira puffed at it for a long time and finally squeezed out a tiny flame. 5 candles were burning, 5 different flames. Caden asked why each flame looked different if the spell was the same. Evelyn answered first. She said the difference was in the channels, in the purity, in the sealing. A standard textbook answer. Caden shook his head. He said the difference was in the intent. Isla lit the fire to keep warm. Evelyn to prove she could. Lirana to illuminate. Yoon to destroy. Mira to keep up. 5 different intentions, 5 different fires. The hall fell silent. Caden explained. Mana isn't water that you push through a pipe. Mana is the world's response to your intention. You don't command the fire to burn, you ask it. And how you ask determines what you get. The purity of the channels isn't a ceiling, it's the width of the road. You can lead an army down a narrow road. You just have to line them up in a column, not a row. Modern mages lined up in rows. They pushed all their power at once. Wide channels let it through. Narrow ones didn't. And the system said that narrow channels were a death sentence. A lie. A convenient one, 3 centuries old. Built so that those with wide roads would feel superior. Evelyn listened with the look of someone having the rug pulled out from under her feet. Everything on which she had built her work, all 72 volumes, all the sleepless nights, all the formulas, all of it was based on the assumption that the channels determine everything. And now this scholarship boy says it's a lie. She wanted to argue. Caden could see it in her pursed lips, in her straight back, in the gloved hands he'd made for her. But she didn't argue, because the gloves on her hands were working, because the pen on her desk wasn't scratching the paper, because the 12 errors in the textbooks turned out to be real errors. The proof was on her, in her hands, in her notes. She was silent, thinking. Caden gave her time. He turned to Isla. He asked her to light the candle again, but this time not from the heat of the pen, from the heat of the candle standing at the other end of the workbench, to transfer the flame from one candle to another across the distance, without a wand, without a gesture, only with intent. Isla turned pale. She said she couldn't do it. Caden asked why. Isla replied that it was too far, that she didn't have enough power. Caden shook his head. He said that distance didn't matter. The fire was already there. It was burning. She just had to show it where to go. Not push it. Show it. Isla looked at the burning candle, at the wick of the extinguished candle at the other end of the workbench. 2 meters. An eternity for a scholar with ordinary channels. She raised her hand, not toward the candles, toward the space between them, and closed her eyes. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. The world began to stir. Evelyn watched with surgical concentration. Yoon didn't move. Lorana breathed quietly. At the 73rd second, the wick of the second candle flared up, a small red flame, uneven, trembling, but alive. Isla opened her eyes. She saw the fire. Her face changed. Not joy, not pride. Realization. Like a person who had considered themselves blind their whole life and suddenly saw. Caden nodded. He said everything was fine. Isla looked at him. For the first time in all this time, he saw in her eyes neither gratitude nor admiration. Confidence. She could. She always could. It's just that no one had told her. The lessons continued every evening. Caden taught the principles, one at a time, slowly, patiently. Just as his father had taught him to hold a hammer. First you hold it, then you feel it, then you understand it, then you do it. 4 steps, no skipping. Evelyn came to the second session with questions, 23 questions, written down on a separate sheet. Each one precise, each one penetrating. Each one struck at the weak spot in his explanation. Caden answered, 16 out of 23. For 7, he said he didn't know. It was the truth. There were things he didn't remember, or didn't understand, or couldn't explain in modern language. Evelyn nodded, jotted it down, said she'd find the answers herself. Caden had no doubt. Yoon didn't ask questions. She practiced, silently, intently. Every exercise Caden gave, she performed with the precision of a mercenary. No unnecessary movements, no unnecessary words. She didn't understand the theory like Evelyn did. She felt the practice, just as a blade feels the hand. In the third session, Caden showed her the silent step technique. Not the full version, just the basics. How to move without creating waves of mana around her body. Modern mercenaries used dampening amulets. Expensive, unreliable. The silent step was free, and it always worked. Yoon mastered the basics in 40 minutes. 200 years before her, it had taken weeks. Caden looked at her and thought that in a past life she would have made the best scout in his squad. Better than Torben. Better than anyone.
Mira was the weakest in the group in terms of strength, and the most important for another reason. She knew everyone, every student, every teacher, every servant, cook, and the guard. She was a network, a living network of information. Caden realized this in the second week and stopped treating her like a child. Mira noticed it instantly. She noticed that he had started asking for her opinion, not about magic, about people.
Which of the instructors would support them when the time came? Which of the upperclassmen might be dangerous? Which of the scholarship students was brave enough to join them? Mira answered precisely, quickly, without boasting, just as a scout reports to a commander. She had been a 16-year-old child in everyone's eyes, and now, for the first time, someone had asked her to be an adult. She squared her shoulders, stopped chatting idly, began to speak when necessary, and remained silent when necessary. Caden watched this and saw her growing, every day, every evening in the workshop. 3 months until the expected fall of the seals. Winter came to the academy, white and silent. Snow settled on the silver spire like a blanket on a sleeper. The corridors grew cold. Scholars wrapped themselves in their ceremonial robes. Aristocrats wore fur linings. Caden wore the same gray uniform and didn't feel the cold. His body had grown accustomed to it. Or perhaps his soul had. He remembered winters worse than this one. The winter near Craigholm, when the ground froze a meter deep and the dead didn't rot because the cold kept them fresh. He didn't like to remember that winter. The academy was preparing for the winter festival, the first major holiday of the year. For the students, it was an occasion to put on their best clothes and dance. For the teachers, an excuse to get drunk. For Caden, it was a reason to prepare 5 gifts. He began working 2 weeks before the festival, every evening after class with the group. When everyone else left, he stayed alone in the workshop, and he created. For Lirana, a hairpin, silver metal, delicate work. The pattern on the hairpin did not repeat the Morrigan crest, but a design that Kay had seen on Lirana's mother's shawl, in the Hall of Echo's memories. The shawl her mother wore every day, which Lirana remembered, but didn't know where she remembered it from. The hairpin felt warm to the touch, not from the rune, from the metal. Caden had chosen an alloy that retained body heat, so that in winter, the back of her neck wouldn't get cold under the hairpin. For Yoon, a sheath. A simple leather sheath for the stiletto he had made for her, but lined with soft fabric so the blade wouldn't dull, and with a small rune on the inside that kept moisture from the metal. The stiletto in this sheath would never rust. And one more thing. There was a pattern on the sheath, not a design, a texture, barely perceptible to the touch. The lines formed a word in the language of the Eastern clans. Caden found it in the memory of the Hall of Echoes. The word did not mean a weapon or power. The word meant a choice. For Evelyn, a quill. No, not a quill. He had already made a quill. For Evelyn, he made a notebook, a cover of dark leather, pages of paper which he had obtained through Mira from aristocratic reserves. Thick, smooth, the very paper of the Valcrest family over which her pen glided without a scratch. 120 pages. On the first page, Caden wrote a single line. He wrote that behind the formulas lies understanding, and that this is a notebook for understanding, not for formulas. For Mira. A watch, not the broken Ashton family watch he had already repaired. A new one, small, a pocket watch, assembled from parts he found in the storage room and at the market behind the dorm. The mechanism was simple, but precise. Caden spent 6 hours calibrating it. On the back cover, he engraved the date they met, the day Mira came to him with a broken amulet and angry eyes. Inside the back cover was a rune, a small one. It did one thing. The watch ticked a little louder when someone Mira trusted was nearby, and a little quieter when someone who wasn't worth it. Not a lie detector, a compass of trust. Rough, imperfect, but for a 16-year-old scout, enough. For Isla, a brooch, round, bronze, with a stone in the center. The stone was an ordinary river quartz that Caden had found in the academy courtyard, but he had polished it so that the light refracted inside it like a tiny rainbow. The brooch had no magical properties. Almost. One rune on the back. It did what Caden considered most important. When Ayla looked at the brooch, she saw her reflection in the stone. Sharp, clear, undistorted. The rune adjusted the refraction so that the face in the reflection looked exactly as it did in reality, without the distortions we see in mirrors, which make us feel worse than we are. Every morning, Ayla looked in the mirror with an apology. Caden wanted her to look into the stone and see herself, the real her, without apologies. The Winter Festival. Evening. Snow outside the windows. Lights in the hall. Music. Students in their finery. The aristocrats were radiant. The scholarship students tried not to stand out. Caden stood by a column in his clean but still gray uniform. He couldn't dance.
Not in this life, nor in the last. Arius Vorgan was a blacksmith's son. Blacksmiths didn't dance, they forged. 5 girls found him by the column, one after another. Lorana first, then Yoon, then Mira with Evelyn. Isla was the last. They stood around him in a small circle, 5 girls, one with silver hair, one with black, one with fiery red, one with freckles, one with eyes brimming with tears at the mere sight of the festive lights, because at home they'd told her, "Don't disgrace yourself." Caden pulled 5 small bundles from his inner pocket. He handed one to each of them. He said he thought they might find these useful right now. They unwrapped them at the same time. Lorana saw a hairpin with a pattern from her mother's shawl and covered her mouth with her hand. Yoon saw the scabbard and ran her finger over the texture. She found a word. She froze. Evelyn opened the notebook. She read the line on the first page. She closed it. She pressed it to her chest. Mira opened the watch cover. She saw the date. She looked at Caden. Her eyes were wide, wet. Ayla pinned on the brooch. She looked into the stone. She saw herself, not a mirror, herself. Silence. Snow outside the windows, music in the distance. 5 girls stood before him and were silent. Lorana was the first to cry, quietly, into her fist, as always. Ayla followed. Ayla cried openly, without restraint, for the first time. Evelyn didn't cry. Her eyes just reddened, and she turned away. Yoon didn't cry. Yoon stood motionless, holding the scabbard in her hands as one would hold a fragile thing, like something that might break. Mira was crying and laughing at the same time and saying that he was terrible and that she hated him, and that the watch was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Caden stood in the middle of it all, not knowing what to do with his hands, with his face, with a 1,000-year-old soul that had suddenly discovered it could do things for people, but didn't know how to stand by them when they cried over those things. He said he thought he'd done something wrong. Mira laughed through her tears. She slapped him on the shoulder. She said that was exactly right. Everything was right. Snow was falling. Lights were burning. 5 girls stood around the scholarship boy who made things for specific people. And at that moment, each of them knew one thing. No matter what happened next, this circle would not break. After the Winter Festival, everything changed. Not on the outside, on the inside. The group had become something more than 5 students and a teacher.
Caden could feel it in the way they entered the workshop. Before, each had come for her own reason. Now they came because this was their place, their circle, their workshop. The lessons became more intense. Caden taught faster. There was little time left. 2 months until the seals were expected to break, maybe less. The stabs in his chest grew more frequent. Every night he woke up from a dull ache. The seals were breaking, one after another. Villages were perishing in the south. Isla had mastered transmitting fire over a distance of up to 20 paces, not from the warmth of her palm, from any heat source within range. A fireplace, a candle, a warm stone, a ray of sunlight. She had learned to see heat as a network, like a web of connections between everything that burns and everything that can burn. This was her magic, her own, not copied, not replicated, created. Evelyn reworked the 12 basic formulas of the course with the corrections Caden had given her. The result was staggering. Her spells became 30% more effective. 30% in 3 months. Even though she had already been the best, now she was the best with the correct formulas. The teachers didn't understand. They chalked it up to talent, to the purity of the Velcrest bloodline. They didn't know that the formulas in their own textbooks were wrong, and that an 18-year-old girl had quietly rewritten them. Yoon became a shadow. Not figuratively, literally. The silent step technique that Caden had shown her had evolved into something more. Yoon had learned to move in such a way that even mages with mana detectors couldn't sense her presence. She walked through the academy's corridors, and people forgot they'd seen her. Not invisibility magic, an absence of presence. The very thing Caden had demonstrated to the observer. Yoon had mastered it better than he had expected, because she had been taught this since childhood. He had simply given her the right tool. Liren. Her progress was different, not quantitative, qualitative. The blade sang to her, every day, every evening when she took it in her hands in the workshop. But now it wasn't just 1 note, 3, 4. She was teaching it her music. Not a melody, a language. The blade became an extension of herself. Caden showed her how to channel mana through the blade rather than through the body's channels. The Morrigan blade was made for this, to be a bridge between will and the world. Lorana wasn't a strong mage. Her channels were average. But through the blade, she could do things that any student at the academy, because the blade remembered 300 years of voices. And now those voices were on her side. Mira didn't become stronger in magic. Mira became stronger in something else. She built a network, a quiet one, an inconspicuous one. 12 students who reported to her on everything happening at the academy, on the teachers' movements, about visitors from outside, about the moods in the different wings, about who was talking to whom, about who went where. Mira knew everything, and she reported to Caden every morning over porridge. Through Mira, Caden learned 2 things. First, Tyron Ashton had stopped monitoring the workshop, not because he'd lost interest, because he'd received a new order from Draven to monitor the southern borders. Something was happening there that demanded more attention than a scholarship student with dirty sewers. Second, the academy's rector had summoned Master Hall to a closed-door meeting. The topic of the meeting was classified, but one of Mira's students worked as a janitor in the rector's wing and overheard 2 words through the door: seal and evacuation. Caden stopped eating his porridge. Evacuation. They were discussing an evacuation. So they knew. They knew the seals were falling. They knew something was coming. And they were preparing not for battle, but for flight. just like 300 years ago, when the great houses hid behind their walls and waited for one man to do everything for them. Caden finished his porridge, slowly, carefully, every spoonful, because in his past life he had learned one rule: eat before battle. Always eat.
Because you don't know when you'll eat next. He went to Hall, found her in the archives. She was sitting at a table. Her face was ashen, hands on her knees. She saw him. She stood up. She said the rector knew about the seals, that the order had sent an official notification. 70% of the seals on the southern border had been destroyed. Estimated time until complete collapse, 2 months. But that was an old estimate. New data showed that the process was accelerating. Hall said she had been ordered to keep quiet, that the rector had forbidden informing the students, that the plan was to quietly evacuate the aristocrats to the northern estates a month before the collapse. They planned to leave the scholarship students behind. Kai Den listened. He wasn't surprised. 300 years and nothing has changed. The aristocrats are fleeing. The commoners are staying behind. The system is working exactly as intended. Hall asked what to do. Caden answered. He said they needed to head south, to the seals. Now. Not in a month, not in 2. Now, while there's still time to do something. Hall turned pale. She asked how. The academy won't let them go. The rector won't allow it. Caden said he wasn't going to ask for permission. Hall looked at him, at the scholarship boy, at the 1,000-year-old hero in a child's body, and she nodded. That evening, Caden gathered everyone in the workshop, 5 girls, Master Hall, 6 of them. He stood at the workbench and looked at them, at each one. Isla with a brooch on her uniform, Evelyn with a notebook under her arm, Lorana with a blade at her back, Yoon with a dagger under her cloak, Mira with a watch in her pocket, Hall by the door. He told them everything, about the seals, about the Dark Lord, about the southern borders, about how there was no time. He didn't tell us one thing, who he was. It wasn't necessary, not now. When he finished, there was silence. Mira was the first to break it. She asked when we were leaving. Not if. When. Caden looked at her, at the 16-year-old girl with a watch that ticked a little louder because she was surrounded by people she trusted. He looked at the others. Not a single one stood up. Not a single one left. Not a single one asked why. They knew why. Because for 3 months in the workshop, he had taught them one thing. Not magic. Not principles. Not technique. He taught them that a master repairs what is broken. And the seals were broken, which meant they needed to be repaired. Caden said they were leaving in 3 days. Hall would provide cover. Officially, it would be a field trip on the history of magic, a visit to historical sites of the Eclipse War. The rector would sign off on it without a second thought. He has other things on his mind. He's busy evacuating the aristocrats. 3 days to prepare. Caden spent them in the workshop. He didn't sleep. He worked. For each of the 5, he prepared one item. Not a gift. A tool. For Isla. A bracelet with 3 stones. Each stone was a reservoir of heat. Charged. Ready. If she needs fire where there is no heat, she will draw it from the stones. 3 charges. 3 shots. Enough. For Evelyn, a plate on her wrist, thin, steel, with runes on the inside. The runes boosted spell accuracy by 12%, the very same 12% she was losing due to errors in the formulas she hadn't yet managed to correct. Now the plate corrected them for her. A temporary measure, a crutch. But on the battlefield, a crutch is better than nothing. For Lirana, nothing. She needs nothing. She has a blade that sings with her voice.
which remembers the voices of all the women of the clan, which Caden had tuned with his own hands. That was enough. But he had made one thing, a small one, a thin chain for her neck. No pendant, no rune, just a chain, made of the same alloy as the hairpin, warm to the touch.
So she wouldn't be cold in winter on the southern border. For Yoon, a second stiletto, a pair, a mirror image, for her left hand, with the same balance, with the same hilt, to fit her palm. Yoon fought with a single blade because the second was always a standard one, not hers. Now she had two, both hers. For Mira, a compass, a small one, brass. The needle didn't point north, the needle pointed to Caden, always, wherever he was, so that if they got separated, Mira could find him. Because Mira was the connecting link, the thread that held them all together. And if the thread lost its center, it would lose its meaning. 3 days had passed. Morning on the departure, cold, snow, gray sky. 6 people at the academy gates, 5 girls and 1 boy. Master Hall stood on the steps and looked at them. She wasn't going. She was staying at the academy, covering for them, averting her gaze, keeping up appearances. All walked over to Caden. Without a word, she handed him a bundle. Torvin's diary.
Caden looked at her. Hall said it might come in handy. That Torvin hadn't written only about runes. He'd written about the seals, about how they were created, and about how they could be restored. Caden took the journal. He looked at Hall, at the woman who was giving him the only artifact of her career, the only proof of everything she believed in. He said he'd bring it back. Hall shook her head, said she didn't need the journal. She needed him to come back. Himself. Alive. Caden nodded, turned toward the gate. 5 girls were waiting, each with her own tool, with her own weapon, with her own place in a formation that didn't yet exist, but already existed in their minds. They walked out of the gates of Silverspire, southward, toward the seals, toward the darkness, toward what had been waiting beyond the edge for 3 centuries. The snow crunched under their feet. Mira walked beside Caden and looked at the compass. The needle pointed straight at him. Mira smiled. She put the compass in her pocket. She didn't need the needle. She already knew where he was. The journey south took 6 days. The winter roads were empty. The villages they passed looked quiet, but the silence felt wrong, not peaceful, alert. People shut their shutters when they saw the 6 travelers in their academy uniforms. They knew, not about the seals, not about the Dark Lord, that something was coming. They sensed it the way animals sense an earthquake before the first tremor. On the 3rd day of the journey, Caden felt the first wave, a pain in his chest, sharp, brief, like a knife stab from within. A seal had broken. Another one. He stopped, pressed his hand to his chest, closed his eyes, counted. 3 left. 3 seals out of 12. 9 had already fallen. Isla was the first to notice. She came over, asked what was wrong. Caden took his hand off his chest, said everything was fine. Isla didn't believe him, but she didn't press the issue. Yoon walked behind them, covering their rear, without orders, without discussion. She had taken that position on the first day and hadn't changed it. Evelyn walked ahead with the map. She calculated the route. She measured the distance, the time, the food supplies. She did it with the same meticulousness with which she took notes. Lorana walked beside Caden, silently, a blade at her back. She didn't ask what was wrong with him. She could see. She saw how he was growing paler by the day, how his hands were trembling, not from the cold, from something inside. She saw and remained silent, because she knew he would speak when he was ready. Mira walked and chatted. She told stories, funny ones, silly ones, about a cat at the academy that steals fish from the cook, about Derek who once fell asleep during a lecture and fell off his chair,
about freckles, which, according to the Ashton family legend, come from the sun's kisses. She chatted not because she didn't feel the weight, because she did.
And she knew that silence would make it unbearable. On the 6th day, they saw the border, a black strip on the horizon. Not a line of defense, not a wall. Scorched earth. A strip of dead soil 100 paces wide. No grass, no snow, no life. The earth was black and glassy, melted, like after a lightning strike. But lightning doesn't leave marks like that. Only one thing leaves marks like that. Dark mana. Mana from beyond the border. They stood at the edge of the strip and watched. Myra stopped chattering. Evelyn put away the map. Yoon placed her hands on her daggers. Isla clenched the bracelet with the stones. Lorana touched the hilt of her blade. Caden stepped forward, onto the black earth. And he felt it, here, right beneath his feet. The remnant of a seal, one of the last 3. It pulsed, weakly, barely perceptibly, like a heart beating its final beats. He dropped to his knees, placed his palms on the ground, closed his eyes, and saw. Not with his eyes, with his memory.
He saw this seal. He had created it 300 years ago, with his own hands, with his own blood, with his own soul. A circle of runes on the ground, each rune written in blood, each line seared with pain, each symbol a piece of his life, embedded in stone to hold back what must not escape. And now that circle was crumbling. The runes were cracking, the lines were breaking, the symbols were fading one by one. And behind them, behind the cracks, in the darkness beyond the edge, something was breathing. Caden opened his eyes. He stood up. He turned to the 5 of them. He said the seal was here, beneath them, and that it would fall in a few days, maybe hours. He said the plan was simple. He would restore the seal, reseal it. But for that he needed time, minutes, 10, maybe 15. And he would be defenseless, completely, because all his power would go into the seal. Everything in this frail body with its filthy channels, every last drop. And while he worked, what lay beyond the threshold would seep out of the cracks. Fragments, shards of darkness. Not an army, not the entire Dark Lord, but enough to kill 6. He needs 10 minutes, and he needs those 5 girls to give him those 10 minutes. Silence. The wind drove the snow across the black glass ground. Caden looked at them, at each one. He saw fear in all of them, even in Yoon. Fear is normal. Fear is right. To fear is to understand. What matters is what you do with that fear. Do you hide behind it, or stand up to it? Isla was the first to take off her gemstone bracelet. She twirled it between her fingers, put it back on, nodded. Yoon pulled out both stilettos, twirled them in her hands, stood to Caden's left, without a word. Evelyn adjusted the plate on her wrist. She checked the runes. She looked at Caden. She said, 10 minutes. Okay. Mira took out her compass. She looked at the needle. The needle pointed straight at him. Mira put the compass away and stepped into the circle. Lorana was last. She walked up to Caden, close. She looked into his eyes for a long time. Then she drew the blade from behind her back, raised it. The blade sang. Not a single note, a melody, complete, whole, alive. Lorana's voice and the voices of all the women of the Morrigan clan. 300 years in a single ring. Caden looked at her silver hair, at her quiet eyes, at the girl who 3 months ago thought she was empty, who now stood before him with a blade pointed at him. He nodded, dropped to his knees, placed his palms on the ground. He closed his eyes and began. Mana flowed from him like blood from an open wound, not through the channels, through his entire body, every cell, every bone, every nerve. The quiet resonance at its peak. One intention: to seal, to close, to hold. Just like then, just like 300 years ago. Only this time the body was weak, the channels were narrow,
and every second counted. Cracks in the ground flashed white. The runes of the seal lit up one after another. Caden felt his life draining into the stone, his body growing cold, his vision darkening, and at the same moment, it poured out of the cracks, black, thick, formless. The darkness beyond the boundaries sensed the seal closing and surged outward. The first fragment burst from the ground on the right, a black mass the size of a man. Swift, Yoon intercepted it on its third step. 2 stilettos, 2 strikes. Precise, quick, silent. The fragment disintegrated. Yoon was already moving toward the next one. The second and third emerged simultaneously. On the left. Isla raised her hand. The stones on the bracelet flared up. Fire from 3 reservoirs struck at once. Not chaotic, directed, precise, like a needle. 2 fragments burned away. Isla paled. 1 stone on the bracelet went dark. 2 charges remained. The 4th fragment was larger, faster. It lunged straight at Caden. Evelyn stood in its path. The plate on her wrist glowed, the runes activated. The shield spell came from her hands perfectly, precisely, without a single drop of mana to spare. The fragment struck the shield and bounced off. Laurana caught it with her blade, with a single strike. The blade sang. Darkness burned in its song and crumbled to ash. The 5th, the 6th, 7th. They were emerging from the cracks faster and faster. Mira stood in the center of the circle next to Caden. She didn't know how to fight, didn't know how to cast shields, didn't know how to gather fire. But she saw. She saw the entire field, all 5 of them, every fragment, every threat. And she screamed. Yun, 2 on the left. Ayla, 1 quick one from behind. Evelyn, shield to the right. Laurana behind him. She was their eyes, their link, their thread. 6 minutes. 7. 8. Caden felt the seal forming, rune by rune, line by line. His body was burning. The channels screamed. The pain was so intense that he saw and heard nothing but the runes on the ground and his hands on the stone. 9 minutes. 10. The last rune. Caden poured everything he had left into it, every drop of mana, every shred of strength, every memory of Arius Vorgan, his father's forge, the smell of molten metal, Selena's face, Torvin's laughter, the silence of the Hall of Echoes. 3 centuries of observation, and these past 3 months. The workshop, Laurana's box, Mira's freckles, Evelyn's tremor, the silence of Yoon, Isla's eyes. Everything he had repaired, every rune he had carved, every gift, every glance, everything. The seal flared. A white light shot from the ground into the sky. The cracks closed. The runes glowed. The seal stood, whole, alive, stronger than it had been. Because this time, it contained not just the soul of one person. It contained care. Fragments of darkness screeched. soundlessly, and retreated back beyond the boundary. The earth fell silent. Caden fell,
face first onto the black stone, unconscious, his body shut down. The channels were 90% burned out. His heart was beating 40 beats per minute, then 30. Lorana was the first to reach him. She fell to her knees beside him. She turned him over. His face was white. His lips were gray. His eyes were closed. He wasn't breathing. No, he was breathing, barely, a thin thread of air between his lips. She pulled him close to her, and at that moment, the blade behind her back began to sing, on its own, without her hand, without her will. The blade sensed her pain and responded, and a wind swept across the scorched earth, and every blade within range that Caden had ever repaired began to sing. Yuna's stiletto rang out with a soft, high-pitched chime. Isla's bracelet responded with warmth. Evelyn's plate glowed with a soft white light. Mira's watch ticked louder. Every single item he had made for them, every object into which he had poured his attention, his care, his knowledge of a specific person, they all responded. Because the master had put a part of himself into them, and now that part was returning, like an echo, like an answer to a question he had never asked aloud. Lorana held him and cried, quietly, into his hair, and said one thing, quietly, barely audible. She said that she wasn't the one he was looking at, that she knew, and that she would stay anyway. Snow began to fall, white, pure, on the black earth, on the 5 girls standing around the unconscious boy, on the seal glowing beneath the snow. Caden didn't hear, didn't see, didn't feel. He lay in the darkness between life and death and saw only one thing, the Hall of Echoes. Quiet, empty, familiar, and a voice, distant, that spoke. Not now, not here, not like this. You have someone to return to. Go back. 3 days. Caden lay unconscious for 3 days. They took turns carrying him back north. Yoon and Evelyn, Lorana and Ayla. Mira carried his things. Torben's diary.
The notebook with the principles. Tools from the workshop. They didn't sleep. They took turns every 2 hours. They walked through the snow, through the cold, through the fear that he wouldn't wake up. On the morning of the 4th day, Caden opened his eyes. He saw the ceiling. Not the stone ceiling of the training hall, a wooden one. Low, warm. He was lying in a bed, in a room, a small one, not his room. It smelled of herbs, medicines, and something else, something warm. He turned his head. Lorana was sitting on a chair nearby, asleep. Her head was on the edge of the bed. Her silver hair was scattered across the blanket. Behind her, in the corner on the floor, sat Yoon, eyes closed, stilettos in her hands, asleep or pretending to be. By the door, Mira was curled up in a chair, small, red-haired, a watch in her hand, ticking quietly. Evelyn was sitting at the table by the window. She wasn't asleep. She was writing, notes, in the notebook he had given her. The pen he had made for her glided silently across the paper. She saw that he had opened his eyes. The pen stopped. Their eyes met. Evelyn stood up silently. She walked over to the bed. She looked at him. Then she turned to the others and quietly uttered a single word. "He's awake." Mira jumped up first. She dropped the clock. She caught it. She rushed to the bed. Yoon opened his eyes instantly. He put away the stilettos. He stood up. Lorana raised her head. She looked at him. sleepy gray eyes, red from tears or from insomnia. She looked at him and didn't say a word. Only her fingers found his hand on the blanket and squeezed it. Footsteps sounded somewhere behind the door, quick ones. Isla ran into the room, a bowl of hot porridge in her hands. She saw his open eyes. The bowl almost fell. Isla pressed it close to her. She looked at him. She smiled, wide, without apology, for the first time. Caden lay in bed, 5 girls around him. Not a single one had left. 3 days. Not a single one had left. He tried to sit up. His body wouldn't obey. The channels were silent, burned out, empty. It would take him weeks to recover, maybe months. But he was alive. The seal stood. The world went on. And there were people nearby who hadn't left. Not because he was a hero, not because he saved the world. Because he had repaired their blade, their stiletto, their quill, their watch, their brooch. Because he had made something for each of them that was just for her. And that turned out to be enough. Caden lay down again. He closed his eyes. Lorana didn't take her hand away. Mira was telling him something about the porridge she'd cooked herself, and that if he didn't eat it, she'd kill him. Yoon stood by the door, on guard, without orders. Evelyn returned to the table. She was writing. Isla set the bowl on the nightstand. Caden lay with his eyes closed, thinking of one thing. In his past life, he had stood alone,
and the world had forgotten him. In this life, he stood with them, and he would be remembered, not as a hero, but as a master who made things for specific people. The snow outside the window fell silently. Mira's clock ticked. The Rana's blade was silent, but silent in a new way, not like an empty house, like a house where everyone had finally gathered.